The entire city was engulfed in a sea of chaotic flames, with piercing screams signaling the arrival of humanity's doomsday. Ignoring the hideous monster roaring right below, Linfan calmly stood on the balcony, complaining that today's coffee was too bitter. He turned back to his computer desk, nonchalantly putting on his gaming headset while the voice chat channel was filled with screams about being torn apart by one's own mother. Linfan silently cursed his teammates as naive idiots, then continued clicking his mouse rapidly, treating the zombie apocalypse as a mere joke. He adjusted his headset, then subtly asked his last remaining teammate about the girlfriend, who was right next to him. With a confident smirk, he coolly declared that the guy's girlfriend was busy tearing him apart at that very moment. Suddenly, a girl rushed forward and hugged him tightly from behind in a very ambiguous posture, easily leading to misunderstanding. It turned out she had transformed into a zombie, her gaping mouth full of hideous tentacles and sharp teeth, ready to snap at his head. Linfan pushed the grotesque head away with one hand, while the other furiously spammed keys to push the lane, determined to carry his team until his last breath. The screen displayed victory, and he breathed a sigh of relief for keeping his promise to his teammates, ignoring the frantic pounding on the door as if it wanted to break the house down. The trembling voice of his neighbor, Liu Weiwei, echoed from outside the door, begging him to open up and let her hide inside. The door opened, revealing Liu Weiwei with her fiery figure, terrified as she was being relentlessly pursued by a horde of crazed undead outside. Linfan looked at her with cold, emotionless eyes, agreeing to help on the condition that she close her eyes. Thinking she was about to receive a hot reward, the girl blushed furiously, clasping her hands and promising to indulge him to the fullest to survive. Slash! A sharp sword strike tore through the air, ending all of the neighbor girl's rosy illusions. Linfan coldly held the cleaver, watching the fallen corpse, considering it a release for her before she could turn into a zombie and bite people. The system immediately displayed a notification that he had eliminated a potential zombie and received one valuable bonus point. His name was Linfan, and he claimed to be just an ordinary indie game designer, not a prophet or a savior whatsoever. His life had been as dull as dishwater until the fateful event an hour ago turned everything upside down. He recalled how he had once softened and saved the beautiful pink-haired neighbor, only to be bitten to death by her in his previous life. He remembered the moment he logged out of the Earth server, when a survival system unexpectedly came online, saving his life at the very last second. Linfan opened his eyes and woke up, immediately checking his character stats panel with a fancy 3D interface, confirming he had successfully respawned. He stood before his room door, contemplating the new game meta, realizing that the mechanism of killing zombies for points was the key to dominating this world. Outside in the hallway, a monster with a head covered in eyes was enjoying a buffet on the corpse of the unfortunate neighbor. The door swung open, and Linfan came face to face with the monster, their eyes meeting with a strange sense of affection. The monster let out a piercing roar, lunging forward, intending to turn the young man in front of it into its next dessert. A brilliant golden knife cut horizontally, and Linfan sent his neighbor to the afterlife, just to test the system's point-earning mechanism. A notification panel appeared, confirming a successful elimination, and he easily pocketed his first bonus point. Looking at Liu Weiwei's mangled corpse, he determined it was good bait to attract other zombies to their demise. Linfan decided to employ a door camping strategy, hiding and waiting for easy kills to preserve maximum HP. He lurked behind the door, peeking out to unleash sneak attacks that caught the zombies off guard. A while later, the strategy was a resounding success, with zombie corpses piled up like mountains right outside his room door. Looking at the bloody battlefield, he sighed in exasperation at the pungent stench that was about to rise. As an exemplary homeowner, he decided he had to clean up the public hallway to make it neat and civilized. He used ropes to tie the zombies into neat bundles, as if he were packing luggage. The young man toiled, dragging this pile of organic waste away for disposal, sweating profusely because it was so heavy. While working as a janitor, his ears caught a strange sound emanating from the darkness at the end of the hallway. The squeaking sound of wheels echoed, and a shadowy figure in a wheelchair slowly emerged, full of dread. Neighbor Uncle Zhang had now evolved into a tumor-headed zombie, roaring a greeting to the young man with a mouth full of tentacles. Linfan was overjoyed because kind Uncle Zhang had brought a wheelchair just when he needed a trash cart, so he conveniently borrowed it without asking. The door to room 203 remained silently closed next to the empty wheelchair, signaling a chilling, deathly space. Linfan stood amidst the battlefield, telling himself that even if the world was ending, he still had to loot for survival. He scratched his head, looking at the pile of zombie corpses stuffed into the trash can, wondering whether to classify them as organic waste or recyclables. While contemplating, his keen hearing caught a strange sound, and his sharp eyes immediately darted towards its source. A bald man on the upper floor balcony looked down, recognizing Linfan as the addicted kid from Uncle Joe's family back in the day. Memories flooded back. This bald man was the bully who used to extort bicycles and beat Linfan to a pulp in the past. Linfan looked up at his old enemy with a cold, emotionless expression, calling out to ask what was happening. The bald man broke out in a cold sweat, fearing that this madman opening his mouth and making noise would attract a horde of zombies for a class reunion right at his doorstep. Seeing Linfan seemed dazed, the bald man gleefully wrote a note, intending to trick the younger man into becoming his free laborer. He held out the note, ordering Linfan to find food and drinks and bring them to his door, offering them like a good dog. Linfan looked at the idiotic request and flatly refused, leaving the bald man frozen for a few seconds. The bald man gnashed his teeth, unable to believe that the good-for-nothing from back then dared to talk back to him so defiantly. He changed his strategy to persuasion, writing a note promising to let Linfan into a secret shelter if he obediently worked as a coolie. Linfan maintained his insolent attitude, brutally refusing a second time, making the bald man so embarrassed he wanted to disappear into the ground. The bald man furiously crumpled the note, his face contorted with anger when his easy prey refused to take the bait. If he couldn't have it, he'd ruin it. He threw dishes onto the ground to create a loud noise, aiming to attract zombies to kill Linfan. The clattering of breaking dishes echoed piercingly, yet Linfan stood still as a statue, his face unchanged by the man's petty trick. The zombies heard the noise and immediately rushed out from the darkness, roaring wildly as they charged at the delicious prey before them. The bald man laughed gleefully from the balcony, mocking Linfan for being so scared his legs were shaking, unable to run, and about to become monster fodder. A sword strike flashed like lightning, and the zombies' heads flew like balls, as Linfan calmly received a notification of experience points from the system. The bald man broke out in a cold sweat, his face falling as he witnessed the absurd power of the kid he had just scorned. Still trying to salvage his last shred of dignity, the bald man yelled that there was still one more zombie not taken down, while Linfan stood proudly with his knife amidst the pile of corpses. Linfan coldly turned his back, ignoring the mutated monster behind him that was carrying the headless corpse of the purple-haired woman like a bag of trash. Instead of attacking Linfan, the monster threw the mangled corpse straight onto the balcony as a gift for the bald man who was peeking out. "Here's yours." The corpse flew through the air at an incredible speed, heading straight for the face of the wretched neighbor. The bald man froze as he received the gift, realizing it was the corpse of his accomplice, with a severed neck from which disgusting tentacles were sprouting. Ignoring the idiots, Linfan calmly cycled out of the dark alley, declaring he didn't need any teammates, as solo was still the best. The system continuously displayed notifications of points being added, and Linfan cycled while enjoying the exhilarating feeling of farming weak enemies for experience points. He stopped at a convenience store, calmly gathered all the necessities, and paid with mere words in front of the cashier who had turned into a zombie. After looting supplies and seeds for long-term planning, Linfan realized his dull cleaver was almost useless, and he needed to find a better, more powerful weapon to survive. While he was contemplating, his ears twitched when he heard the roar of an engine echoing from afar. He turned his head, his sharp gaze piercing the darkness, where a bus unusually loomed into view. A bus sped wildly through the streets, its loud engine dragging a horde of hungry zombies in its wake. Bus number 2714 screeched to a halt, burning its tires right in front of Linfan, its headlights shining directly on him, accompanied by a deafening honk. The dazzling headlights forced Linfan to raise a hand to shield his eyes, triggering a flood of terrible memories in his mind. In his memory, his wicked stepmother was sitting in the car, cursing, considering his upbringing a disgusting burden that needed to be immediately gotten rid of. Young Linfan huddled in the back seat, clutching his teddy bear and crying desperately for his mother in vain because he was rejected by his relatives. The furious woman turned back and screamed, threatening to kill the boy on the spot if he dared to cry one more sound. Her rage reached its peak, and she lunged forward and yanked her husband's steering wheel, regardless of the danger, signaling an impending catastrophic accident. The stepmother frantically lunged and ripped the steering wheel, causing the car to swerve violently in the dark night. Young Linfan opened his tear-filled eyes wide, witnessing the moment of death arriving right before him. Crash! The out-of-control car slammed straight into the median, creating a horrific collision with sparks flying everywhere. Back in reality, the driver Huang poked his head out of the bus with a mocking expression, sarcastically asking if Linfan wanted to get on. The driver sneered, threatening that if Linfan didn't get on the bus, he would be torn to shreds by the zombies. Linfan stood still as a rock, his hand gripping the cleaver, his back turned to the talkative driver. On the bus, an innocent, bespectacled student tried to dissuade Huang, fearing the noise would attract more zombies. Slap! Huang swung his knife and slapped the student directly in the face, yelling that since it was the apocalypse, he could do whatever he wanted. He kicked the poor student out of the driver's seat, declaring that the obedient students were now in his hands. The driver flashed a twisted, sick smile, deciding to throw the student out onto the street so he could have company with the dead. The student tumbled onto the cold asphalt road after the brutal, inhumane kick. In the rearview mirror, Linfan's solitary figure was reflected eerily amidst the desolate landscape. Huang guffawed when he saw the kitchen knife in Linfan's hand, mocking him as an idiot trying to clear the entire map. Linfan exuded a chilling, killing intent, firmly stating that death was not in his dictionary today. Memories of his gentle, embracing mother resurfaced, reminding him of his promise to live bravely and kindly. With a resolute, fiery gaze, he swung his arm and powerfully threw the cleaver towards the moving bus. The knife sliced through the wind with a perfect trajectory, aiming straight for the bus's critical weak point. Thwack! The blade plunged deep into the bus tire, causing it to deflate instantly with a piercing hiss. Crash! The bus lost control and slammed into a signpost, its shattered glass blocking the wretched driver's escape route. Driver Huang crawled on the pile of broken glass, whimpering desperately, begging someone to save his miserable life. Seeing Linfan on his bicycle, he quickly admitted his wrongdoing and begged for his life like a cowering dog. Linfan looked down with contempt, exposing the extreme fear that enveloped this cowardly man. With a meaningful smirk, Linfan announced that Huang's friends had come looking for him, and he would leave them space to catch up. Ignoring the driver who was bewildered and didn't understand what was happening, Linfan calmly cycled away into the cold night. A mutated zombie with a cluster of hideous eyes suddenly appeared from behind and immediately took a bite out of the driver's neck. A shrill scream echoed as the entire horde of undead rushed to tear apart the mangled bus, turning the place into a blood feast. Linfan's bicycle wheels continued to roll steadily on the road, leaving behind a scene of chaos and death. Linfan calmly cycled through the city of death, his status board showing superior strength, but his score was still a perfect 0. From a high-rise apartment, a beautiful woman and her young daughter hastily called out to stop the young man. Linfan looked back, his gaze settling on the skinny little girl who was looking at him with pitiful hunger. At the apartment door, the woman knelt down, begging for some food for her daughter because her husband was dead and there was nothing left to eat in the house. Without many words, Linfan generously pulled out 2 squashes and a huge winter melon, which stunned the woman completely. Suddenly, Linfan's eyes lit up like car headlights when he discovered something extremely interesting. He stared intently at the replica Frostmourne sword displayed in the glass cabinet, a dream item for every gamer. The woman hastily took out the sword and offered it to her benefactor, saying that it was something her husband bought when he was alive, and now it suited Linfan better. Linfan groaned with pleasure, holding the sword in his hand, refusing the polite words of the mother and daughter because he had stumbled upon such a great bargain. He happily waved goodbye to the mother and daughter, then took his new weapon and left, leaving the little girl wondering if the uncle was crazy. Just as he stepped out the door, intending to test the sword's sharpness on the zombies, a girl was suddenly thrown from above, landing right in front of him. Thud! A woman's corpse fell freely and slammed hard onto the ground right in front of Linfan, causing blood to splatter everywhere. On the 5th floor balcony, a bald man was puffing on a cigarette and cursing loudly because the person he had painstakingly trained dared to talk back. Linfan glanced at the corpse, covered in bruises, realizing that the girl had been brutally tortured like in medieval times before she died. The unfortunate girl's wide, despairing, and resentful eyes were identical to his mother's dying gaze years ago. He looked up at the perpetrator with cold eyes and asked why they had acted so cruelly. The bald man was utterly astonished to see someone daring to swagger down the street without fear of zombies in these chaotic times. He arrogantly declared that this building was his territory, and he had the right to do anything he pleased with the women here, with no one allowed to interfere. Linfan tightened his grip on his sword, realizing that if this scumbag were allowed to live, the neighbor's mother and child would soon be in danger. Instead of rushing in to kill immediately, he unexpectedly hoisted the corpse onto his shoulder and silently moved into the building with an inscrutable expression. Seeing this strange action, the bald man sneered, thinking the madman intended to take the corpse home for depraved acts. He stood above, yelling down threats, telling Linfan to get lost before he got angry and came down to deal with him properly. After cursing, the bald man turned back inside, plopped onto the sofa, and popped open a soda can to cool down after his merchandise was ruined. He gulped down the can of soda, smugly thinking about the absolute power the apocalypse granted him to freely trample women. Knock, knock. Urgent knocking echoed, interrupting the bald man's sick thoughts. He grabbed a baseball bat and approached the door, muttering, hoping the knocker wasn't a stray zombie. He openly showed his annoyance, as zombies in the hallway would greatly complicate his search for new toys. He peered through the peephole and nearly had a heart attack when he saw the dead girl's bloodshot, bleeding eyes staring back at him. He let out a terrified scream and fell backward, utterly horrified by the ghostly sight that had just met his eyes. Outside the door, Linfan held the corpse with one hand, covering the peephole, while with the other, he pounded on the door, ordering the bald man to open it immediately. The bald man sighed in relief, reassuring himself that the one who had just scared him was merely a harmless idiot outside. He regained his cunning look, planning to shout loudly to lure the zombies to tear apart the one who dared to disturb him. Bang! The sturdy security door was kicked open by Linfan, and dazzling light flooded the dark room. The bald man was utterly terrified to see Linfan carrying the corpse with one hand, while with the other, he tore open the iron door as if it were paper. Linfan stepped inside, his cold gaze sweeping over the pile of sick torture tools the bald man had used to torment the girl. The bald man fell to the floor, scrambling backward and yelling, demanding to know why Linfan had brought that damned corpse into his home. Linfan's bloodshot eyes glared as he coldly declared that he had brought her to witness the hefty price the bald man would pay. The police station sign appeared chillingly in the dark night, signaling the execution site Linfan had chosen for the perpetrator. The bald man was bound and gagged with his own BDSM tools, his face drained of all color, only able to whimper in despair. Linfan led the bald man like a dog, casually stating that punishing criminals was the most normal thing in the world. The bald man gnashed his teeth, cursing Linfan in his mind as a perverted psychopath obsessed with zombie movies. As if reading his thoughts, Linfan casually admitted that he had indeed read and watched such cultural works before. As he dragged his prey, he lectured about the truth of survival, that the apocalypse was a time to be free to do anything one liked. Linfan grabbed the bald man's hair and yanked his head back, mocking him for not being able to distinguish between illusion and brutal reality. He kicked the bald man straight into the police station's glass door, the crashing sound echoing sharply in the night. The bald man writhed on the floor, groaning in pain and terror at Linfan's absurd physical strength. He struggled to get up, screaming in vain, asserting that all the police had left and no one could punish him anymore. Linfan flashed a demonic smile, gently informing the man that he was gravely mistaken, as there were still many people here. The bald man froze, seeing a horde of police zombies rushing toward him, their mouths howling with hunger, ready to dispense justice. The buzzcut man reassured his teammates that everything would be fine, but his face was extremely tense. The group's leader ordered them to focus on looting medical books, strictly forbidding any trivial distractions. They were gleeful, thinking they'd hit the jackpot because the library was deserted, with not a single zombie lurking about. The man in the hat suddenly stopped, signaling the group to halt because his intuition told him something was amiss. The girl immediately drew her knife and took a defensive stance, the lightning-fast reflexes of someone accustomed to danger. The buzzcut man cautiously checked a blind spot with his baseball bat, subjectively reporting the area safe. The entire group broke down the door and stormed in, their morale high and ready to clear any obstacles in their path. Linfan sat casually on a table, waving a friendly greeting that made the entire group jump as if they'd seen a ghost. The three intruders were utterly terrified, thinking they had encountered a mutated zombie that could speak human language. Linfan stood up and explained that he was alive, but the killing intent he exuded was even more terrifying than a monster's. He held a book on vegetable gardening in his hand, his demeanor eerily calm amidst the apocalypse. The man in the hat whispered to the leader that asking what he was doing in the library was an utterly foolish question. Linfan casually replied that he was reading a book, his attitude as relaxed as if this were his own living room. The group of strangers quickly apologized for disturbing him, trying to lower their voices so as not to provoke this formidable figure. The man in the hat noticed the formidable sword on Linfan's back, warning his teammates that this guy was no ordinary person. The leader led the group past him, trying to maintain her composure, but cold sweat was pouring down her face. Her survival instincts screamed at her that this young man was a potential danger not to be trifled with. The group quietly ventured deeper into the bookshelves, wanting to get out of Linfan's sight as quickly as possible. Even after they were out of sight, they still looked back suspiciously, fearing that the monster might ambush them from behind. Linfan casually lectured the strangers about library book borrowing rules, like an exemplary librarian. The three survivors stood frozen, suspecting this guy had just escaped from a mental asylum due to his eccentric behavior. The purple-haired girl broke out in a cold sweat, timidly asking if he was aware of the disaster unfolding outside. Linfan replied nonchalantly while reading his book that nothing had changed except for zombies biting people. The girl stared at him, unable to believe her ears at such absurd calmness. The man in the hat became furious, yelling to ask if he was insane to disregard the apocalypse like that. Linfan smiled amiably, immediately revealed his name and address, and boasted about being able to handle 100 zombies. The group of 3 fell completely silent, their faces dumbfounded by the young man's boasting. They all turned and fled for their lives, convinced that this person was severely insane and extremely dangerous. Linfan scratched his head in confusion, regretting that they had politely left too quickly before he could ask their names. He returned to the table, determined to diligently study agricultural books, to grow his own food and survive the days. At a secret base deep underground in the desert, the atmosphere was extremely tense. Scientists were dissecting corpses and questioning the daily evolution of the undead horde. The specimen on the operating table was a hideous, fleshy tumor covered in glowing red eyes that seemed to peer into one's soul. The bespectacled doctor asserted that this virus was extremely bizarre and had no suitable antidote. The old professor mentioned the undead gene, suspecting it to be a grotesque form of resurrection for the dead. Linfan confidently strolled out to the apartment complex's flower garden, after having absorbed enough agricultural knowledge. He stood in the middle of the empty plot, sword on his shoulder, ready to begin the task of cultivating the land. Linfan loudly announced his identity and claimed ownership of the garden, challenging anyone who dared to object. Linfan performed a superhero landing, stomping the mutated monster's head to a pulp, sending blood splattering everywhere. He swung his sword high with great momentum, shouting a challenge to see if any other zombies dared to approach and offer their lives. The system continuously displayed point notifications as Linfan glided like the wind, decapitating the undead horde to farm experience. Having cleared the map, he stood proudly, sighing in relief, knowing he could now safely be a farmer without fear of disturbance. Gazing at the deserted battlefield, devoid of any living soul, he contentedly confirmed that no one would dare steal his vegetables anymore. His rumbling stomach protested, so he decided to take a break to refuel and visit his 2 neighbors, a mother and daughter. Linfan generously treated the mother and daughter to a luxurious instant noodle feast, as all fresh food had spoiled, moving the mother to tears. The neighbor blushed furiously, hesitantly expressing her desire to repay him, not wanting to owe such a great debt of gratitude. She tearfully confided about her deceased husband and her extreme fear for her young daughter's safety amidst the chaos. Linfan slurped his noodles nonchalantly, asking what specific help she needed with an extremely trustworthy expression. The beautiful mother's eyes widened in surprise, beads of sweat forming on her brow, as she hadn't expected the young man to agree so easily. She gathered all her courage, blushing profusely, and proposed that she and her daughter accompany him to find a way to survive. Linfan grinned brightly, mistakenly thinking she wanted to rent a house, and enthusiastically advised that prices in this area were dirt cheap, only around 1,000 or 2,000 yuan. The neighbor froze completely, utterly bewildered as she realized their thought processes were severely out of sync. The scene shifted to another high-rise building, where flickering lights pierced the perilous apocalyptic night. An employee named Chen was extremely tense, thinking he had found a lifeline when his phone unexpectedly rang. He answered the phone with a weary expression as Linfan's voice on the other end asked about renting a house as if the world were still normal. The man named Chen furiously hung up, muttering curses, wondering what lunatic had the leisure to inquire about real estate at such a time. He yelled into the phone in despair, cursing Linfan as insane for wanting to rent a house while the world was collapsing. Linfan calmly called back and reassured his neighbor that the other party was just a little hot-headed. Chen Su roared into the phone, his face looking as if he wanted to devour the person disturbing him amidst the chaos. The man named Chen furiously agreed to rent it out and challenged him to drag himself to the Fangxi International Building to get the keys. Linfan immediately stood up, announced the good news to his 2 neighbors, and eagerly prepared to set off to claim his new home. The neighbor quickly reached out to stop him, but his figure had already decisively disappeared behind the door. At Chen Su's group's base, a subordinate approached to check on his boss, who was sitting on the floor with a dazed expression. The subordinate put an arm around Chen Su's shoulder and pulled him to a secluded corner to discuss the group's crucial matters of survival. He whispered about recalculating the food reserves, which would only last for half a month at most. The subordinate proposed a cruel plan: abandon the 4 elderly members of the group to save food for the useful ones. He analyzed that they couldn't act openly because these elderly people had previously shared food and were well liked by everyone. The cunning man revealed his bloodthirsty nature as he planned to eliminate the elderly, then slaughter the remaining men. He continued to categorize women and declared that girls with less attractive appearances would also be mercilessly eliminated. His eyes gleamed with lechery as he finalized the plan to keep the pretty young women to enjoy themselves through the apocalypse. The scene shifted to Linfan cycling, leading an entire army of zombies, and even turning back to remind them to exercise. The survivors on a nearby building's balcony gaped in astonishment, seeing the young man cycling through the streets amidst a horde of undead. One man in that group immediately dismissed the idea of calling for help and ran inside, believing that cycling in these times was suicide. Linfan's legs continuously pedaled at terrifying speed, creating whistling sounds on the road. He stopped his bike in front of the Fangxi International Residential Complex, marveling at the opulence of the wealthiest neighborhood. Linfan turned his head to look at the deserted road and smirked, as he had completely shaken off the slow zombies. Chen Gang stood before the crowd, spouting empty promises about sharing food to calm the people. The elderly group was isolated in a corner, their faces resigned, as if they already knew their tragic fate was approaching. Wang Zhongguo and Su Guifen held hands tightly, accepting their sacrifice to pave the way for the younger generation to rebuild the country. Zhou Aijun also nodded in agreement with the decision to leave, so as not to become a burden to the group. Liang Yan embraced her husband in their final moments with a bitter yet forgiving smile. Chen Gang patted Xiao Xiao's shoulder, praising his subordinate for his surprisingly swift and effective manipulation of the crowd's psychology. In Xiao Xiao's mind, a cruel vision was forming. Eliminate all the elderly and men to monopolize resources, and a harem of beautiful women. The elderly group stood up, facing the young people with calm composure, showing no fear. Old Man Wang boldly declared that they would voluntarily leave and await death, rather than touch the group's food reserves. The cowardly youths panicked, demanding to stop them, fearing the elders going downstairs would open the gate and lure zombies into the building. Their selfishness reached its peak as they screamed, demanding to throw the group of elders from the rooftop to the ground to eliminate future troubles. A knock on the door echoed, interrupting the chaos, accompanied by a polite yet dangerously ominous question seeking someone. The iron door rattled violently under the force from outside, making the entire group jump in fright and look out. Chen Gong furiously yelled, asking who was crazy enough to rent a house in these chaotic, deadly times. With a terrifying crash, the sturdy iron door was kicked open, scattering like a cheap piece of cardboard. Linfan stepped in with a greatsword on his shoulder, remarking disdainfully on the door's terrible quality. Xiao Xiao whispered to his boss the plan to use Linfan as bait and throw the elders down to distract the zombies. The two leaders exchanged smug smiles, having devised a win-win scheme to preserve their lives. Chen Gong's attitude changed in a flash, agreeing to rent the house to trick Linfan into a deadly trap. Linfan feigned innocence, pulling out a wad of cash and handing it to Chen Chu, playing the role of a serious young man looking to rent a house in the apocalypse. Chen Chu broke out in a cold sweat, waving his hands in refusal, only wanting to get rid of this clueless guy as quickly as possible to avoid trouble. He turned to leave, but suddenly stopped when his gaze fell upon the door of the room where the elders were sheltering. Linfan spoke up, asking about Mr. Zhou Aijun, causing the entire group of elders to look up in confusion, not understanding what was happening. He rushed over, gripping the old man's hand, shaking it enthusiastically, like a zealous fan meeting a national military engineering idol. The young man wondered why these national treasures intended to leave the safe zone and sacrifice themselves to the undead. The elderly couple sadly explained that they wished to sacrifice themselves to leave their meager resources for the younger generation to continue living. Linfan's face hardened, his eyes as sharp as razors, completely replacing his previous carefree demeanor, making the atmosphere thicken. Chen Chu and his subordinate shivered in terror, sensing the overwhelming killing intent emanating from the young monster before them. He boldly declared that he would protect all the elders, asserting that his power was more than enough to carry the team and keep everyone safe. Linfan winked confidently, boasting about his toughness to reassure the elders' anxious spirits. He nonchalantly invited everyone to his neighborhood, even promising to find a real estate agent to handle the rental later, as if the world were still normal. The elders froze completely, sweat pouring down like rain at the absurd and overly optimistic attitude of this strange young man. Without waiting for anyone to object, Linfan cheerfully pulled the entire group along, as if leading children to kindergarten, disregarding their astonishment. Chen Chu intended to rush out and stop him, but was held back by his cunning subordinate, who wore a calculating and sinister expression. The scoundrel subordinate revealed his true nature, suggesting they go downstairs, then use sound to lure zombies to devour the entire group. Loud, jarring noises rang out as numerous heavy objects were thrown around Linfan's position to create a racket. He looked up, his gaze calm, but harboring deadly danger at the despicable trick of those scumbags. The cowardly youths on the balcony frantically threw flower pots to the ground to create noise, attracting hordes of the undead to tear apart the group below. The scumbags on the balcony gleefully threw all sorts of items down with the malicious intent of crushing the poor group of elders. Linfan looked up with eyes as sharp as razors, his killing intent radiating, making the surrounding air seem to freeze. The elders were stunned to realize that the brats not only wanted to kill them, but also intended to use noise to summon hordes of the undead for a feast. Mr. Joe suddenly froze, sweat breaking out as he noticed the unusually eerie silence surrounding the area. An entire sea of zombie corpses lay scattered on the ground, piled up as evidence of a bloody massacre that had just occurred. The old engineer stammered, speechless, unable to believe his eyes as he realized who was the author of this horrifying battlefield. Linfan scratched his head, giving an innocent, wry smile, casually admitting he had to clean up thoroughly to climb up here safely. All four elders simultaneously screamed in horror, so utterly shocked that their jaws nearly dropped at the absurd power of this kid on a bicycle. On the balcony, the green-haired Xiao and his cronies began to panic intensely because they had thrown things until their arms ached. Yet below, there was absolute silence. Not a single growl. They looked down and were struck dumb, seeing piles of zombie corpses stacked like sardines instead of rushing to tear apart their prey as intended. The cowards couldn't believe their eyes, muttering denials of the cruel reality that their plan to use others as pawns had failed. The leader, Xiao, pushed his subordinates aside, leaning over the railing to personally verify what the hell was actually happening below. His face paled, cold sweat pouring down as he realized the harsh truth. There were no surviving zombies left to exploit. In a fit of madness, Xiao suddenly grabbed a subordinate standing nearby and ruthlessly pushed him off the railing, despite the victim's desperate pleas. The unfortunate man plummeted to the ground with desperate screams, becoming a sacrifice to his own boss's cruelty. The remaining men on the balcony froze, staring at Xiao with extreme horror at his cold-blooded, unhesitating action. Xiao flashed a sick smile, explaining that throwing inanimate objects was now useless because the nearby undead had all been eliminated. According to his cruel logic, to lure monsters from afar, they absolutely needed the strong scent of fresh blood and raw flesh. Despite being scared out of their wits, the subordinates still forced themselves to praise Boss Xiao's brutal intelligence to save their own lives. Linfan turned to ask old Mr. Zhou Aijun if there was a car, as his crappy bicycle couldn't carry the whole team. He smirked confidently, asserting that his bicycle didn't have enough space for this crowd. Having said that, he dashed towards the main gate, leaving old Mr. Zhou Aijun standing bewildered, his mind still processing. Wang Zhongguo and Zhou Aijun frantically demanded to follow and assist, fearing the reckless young man would act rashly and die in vain. Old Mrs. Xu Guifen calmly stopped them, placing absolute trust in Linfan's cunning and resourceful mind. Linfan held a severed zombie arm covered in eye holes, contemptuously looking at the weak, slimy undead lurking outside the iron gate. He stood proudly and alone before the main gate, facing an entire legion of undead screaming with hunger. On the balcony, Xiao and the man in the vest named Chen wondered why the kid was committing suicide by rushing into certain death alone. Xiao guffawed contemptuously, believing Linfan had gone mad with fear, his brain short-circuited. Chen started to feel something was wrong as Linfan didn't flee but acted strangely, as if calculating something. He broke out in a cold sweat, his face paling as he realized Linfan's direction of movement reeked of danger for them. Both leaders' faces drained of color, and they screamed in alarm as they realized the crazy intention of the young man below. Linfan forcefully swung open the iron gate, its screeching sound signaling the hour of death for the scoundrels on the upper floor. The two ringleaders screamed miserably as they realized Linfan was leading an entire horde of zombies straight to them as a gift. The zombie horde, like escaped crocodiles, surged into the building at terrifying speed, their roars echoing through the sky. Linfan, hidden behind the door, smirked, saying he was merely kindly helping them fulfill their wish to meet the zombies. No thanks necessary. The frenzied undead charged, tearing apart the unfortunate group, turning the scene into a chaotic earthly hell. Chen screamed curses at Linfan, calling him a bastard in despair before being engulfed by the sea of undead. The scene shifted to a peaceful mode. Linfan sat happily eating dinner with the neighbor's family and the group of elders, as if no massacre had just occurred. While eating dinner, Linfan glared intently at little Fei Fei, making her flinch, thinking she had food on her face. He suddenly changed his tone, seriously asking the girl where her school bag was, making her turn pale with fright. Madame Liang, sitting nearby, interjected with a blunt statement that even in the apocalypse, children must study properly. Fei Fei whimpered, turning to her mother for help, asking if she really had to toil over books when the world was ending. The mother also sided with the adults, cruelly patting her daughter's head, making the girl cry because everyone was mean to her. The whole room erupted in joyful laughter, welcoming the 6 new members, which instantly dispelled the gloomy atmosphere of the building. Linfan stood up, nonchalantly saying he was going to take out the trash and pick up some books for the girl, making her shriek in tears for the second time. Outside in the silent night, The undead began to roam, searching for prey with eerie growls echoing through the streets. Linfan acted with extreme precision, piercing 2 dazed zombies in the middle of the road with arrows in an instant. He held his bow and sneered, remarking that the stragglers on the street were easy to deal with, but those hiding indoors were troublesome. Elsewhere, the purple-haired girl and her companions were calculating their food supplies and discussing the remaining water sources. She shrewdly realized that the water plant was still operational, proving that someone was occupying and running it. A loud explosion reverberated through the entire area, startling the whole group, who looked out the window in panic. The explosion erupted violently outside, attracting all the zombies in the area, who rushed towards it like moths to a flame. The purple-haired girl gritted her teeth and cursed, annoyed that she didn't know which bastard had caused such a huge commotion. The entire group fled in panic as they were surrounded by the undead from all sides, screaming for their lives in despair. A gigantic, pitch-black hand descended from nowhere, crushing the zombies and the living below into a pulp. The girl was utterly horrified as she witnessed the colossal monster, realizing that the zombies had begun to evolve and mutate. She hid herself away in a trash can, sweating profusely from extreme fear of the monster outside. The purple-haired girl was stunned, breaking out in a cold sweat as she realized the identity of the madman who had just saved their group. The 2 men beside her also gaped in astonishment as they watched their benefactor running while dragging a bright green trash can. Linfan stopped in front of Old Chew's former supermarket. His heavy breathing echoed clearly in the silent space. He put down the trash can, muttering about his plan to retrieve Feifei's backpack after finding a place to dump this pile of garbage. A group of vagrant youths stood on the second-floor balcony, curiously calling down with an insolent attitude. Linfan looked up and nonchalantly replied that his building's trash can was full, so he had to find a place to dump it and run a few errands while he was at it. The whole group on the balcony burst into uproarious laughter, sarcastically praising him as a rare talent of the apocalypse. The green-haired leader took a drag from his cigarette, sneering mockingly at his subordinates that the guy below was definitely an idiot. Linfan maintained a poker face, casually asking in return what was so unusual about taking out the trash. He even kindly asked if the people up there needed any help, with an extremely serious and sincere attitude. The leader haughtily refused, boasting about his comfortable life and cursing Linfan as a lunatic with brain problems. He jutted his chin, threatening that if he just screamed once, the zombies would immediately rush over and tear Linfan apart. Linfan didn't bother to argue, waved goodbye, and turned to leave, infuriating the leader, who felt completely ignored. The green-haired man, resentful, urged his subordinates to shout loudly to lure the zombies, wanting to see the good show when that arrogant guy was chased. The subordinates responded enthusiastically, believing they were absolutely safe on the second floor, unless zombies grew wings and could fly. The whole group huddled together, screaming bizarre sounds like monkeys to attract the attention of the undead horde. The space was eerily silent. Not a single zombie appeared, nor was there any growl in response. The thugs started breaking out in a cold sweat, utterly bewildered and wondering where the bloodthirsty monsters had gone. Linfan stepped into the building's darkness, leaving behind a chilling statement, asserting that the zombies were coming right now. The colossal monster let out a terrifying roar, making the thugs' faces turn ashen white. Linfan calmly surveyed the ruined debris, sarcastically remarking that those juvenile delinquents were probably having a fun party with the zombies. He suddenly paused when his keen ears caught the sound of wailing echoing from afar. Linfan identified the sound as coming from the Shanya bookstore, and guessed that a baby was inside. He carried his sword and ascended the dark staircase, wondering if any child could survive in this deadly place. The sight that met his eyes was a blue-haired woman who had hanged herself in the cold room. Linfan approached to observe the corpse tightly clutching a small bundle, wondering why she had chosen death when her child was still alive. He frowned in thought, concluding that this act was no different from a mother who had despaired and abandoned her child. The newborn baby in the swaddling clothes burst into heart-wrenching sobs, as if wanting to tear apart the deadly silence. Linfan gently picked up the baby, awkwardly comforting it, and promising to take the little one out of this earthly hell. He curiously picked up a small notebook left by the mother beside the baby. The tear-soaked diary entries spoke of despair as food supplies dwindled and her body grew weaker. In the past, the mother had sat in the darkness, trying to use her last bit of strength to arrange a path for her child to survive. She had deliberately smashed her own teeth and tightly wrapped tape around her mouth to ensure she couldn't bite her child if she turned into an undead. That great mother had chosen to hang herself to protect little Meng Meng, leaving a dying wish, begging whoever came after to save the child. Linfan looked at the mother's corpse with admiration, solemnly promising on his honor that he would do everything possible to keep the baby alive. Suddenly, a basketball rolled, clattering across the floor, breaking the sorrowful atmosphere. Just as Linfan exclaimed in surprise, a hideous, multi-eyed monster lunged down from the ceiling with terrifying speed. He reacted extremely quickly, dodging the death blow, realizing this monster's speed far surpassed ordinary zombies. Linfan was stunned to realize this monster was not only fast but also intelligent, using the baby as bait. The monster lunged like an arrow, but Linfan's reflexes were even faster. He smoothly parried the attack while holding the baby. With a single, clean sword stroke, the speed zombie was split in half, and the system chimed, instantly awarding 3 easy points. He looked at the corpse on the ground and wondered, as up until now, zombies had always been brainless, not cunning like this. Looking around and seeing only books, the young man bluntly concluded that this one became smart from diligently reading books. Since he was already in a repository of knowledge, he immediately grabbed some exercise books as a gift for Liu Weiwei, believing she would be overjoyed. The scene shifts to a mysterious underground base located deep beneath a desolate desert, a sanctuary for the remnants of humanity. The old professor was meticulously examining a strange specimen, unable to believe this crystal came out of the monster's heads. The beautiful female officer confirmed this was a crystal extracted from the skull of an unusual mutated creature that had just been eliminated. The old man requested a detailed report on the incident to see what exactly was happening with the zombies outside. Recalling the scene, the sniper named Xiangnan had accurately lodged a bullet right in the target's forehead. But this armored monster was so tough that even with a bullet through its head, it still charged like a berserk tank. It took several more heavy-caliber shots in succession to shatter its head for the giant monster to finally fall to the dark ground. The female officer emphasized that ordinary zombies could be dealt with just by using an iron rod, but this one required endless gunfire to kill. The old professor broke out in a cold sweat, concluding that the zombies were evolving into demons and were no longer just walking corpses. The situation was so dire that the old man began to doubt the possibility of saving the world as major bases gradually lost contact. Seeing the tense atmosphere, the female officer blushed and hesitantly spoke up because she had a somewhat crazy idea. She pulled out knowledge from web novels, saying that these crystal chunks were the very materials for humans to evolve into superhumans. After hearing this, the old professor's face went utterly blank, not understanding what kind of genre zombie novels were to have such fantastical theories. A beauty in a flamboyant dress secretly pulled back the window curtain, gazing out at the desolate world. She was stunned to see Linfan strolling through the zombie-infested streets as if he were on a catwalk. With the sixth sense of a top-server gamer, Linfan immediately glanced towards the furtive gaze. Su Xiaoxiao, a popular online sweet baker, quickly covered her mouth and hid, fearing detection. Linfan clicked his tongue and dismissed it, thinking it was just some lucky survivor whose time hadn't come yet. His keen ears twitched slightly as he caught the sound of a car engine tearing through the wind, rushing towards him. A police car screeched to a halt in front of the station, but those who stepped out were not enforcers of justice. 3 thugs with arrogant expressions stepped out of the car, hastily carrying out their dark scheme. Linfan cheerfully waved hello as if greeting old friends, even though his nose had already caught the stench of blood on them. The bald driver was dumbfounded, unable to believe his eyes when he saw a kid, still alive and grinning, standing in the middle of the street. The man with the top knot dismissed his curiosity, reminding the group that they had to find the goods for their boss, or they'd be skinned alive. The bald man looked at Linfan with a twisted gaze, a plan forming in his mind to steal his weapon and then drag him behind the car as zombie bait. In the blink of an eye, Linfan's provocative face was pressed against the car window, startling the bald man out of his wits. He flashed his signature harmless smile, asking about the well-being of the brothers in an overly friendly manner. The bald man broke out in a cold sweat, his face drained of color, unable to comprehend who had just teleported there. He was utterly panicked, wondering how someone so far away could close in like a ghost in an instant. Before they could recover, Linfan was already standing casually behind the group, as if he were their 4th member. The bald man tried to swallow his fear, changing the subject to whether they had found the boss's toys yet to hide his terror. The group struggled to load several heavy bags into the car, gleefully anticipating the prosperous life ahead thanks to these weapons. Linfan began his civic lesson, boasting to the curly-haired man that he usually negotiated with zombies before slicing them in half. The man in the suit pointed his gun directly at Linfan's face with the contemptuous gaze of a superior. He sneered, asking in a challenging tone if the kid in front of him knew how to fear a hot weapon. Linfan maintained a stone-cold expression, not even blinking at the thug's threat. The man in the suit began lecturing on the philosophy of survival, asserting that looting was natural, and grew resentful at being looked down upon. Just as his finger was about to pull the trigger, a sharp, wind-tearing sound echoed, faster than the speed of sound. A clean sword stroke swept past, severing both the gun and the man in the suit in an instant. Linfan stood looking at the fallen corpse, offering a sarcastic apology that he was so used to slicing zombies he forgot this was a person. The man with the top knot furiously cursed, immediately pointing his gun at Linfan, intending to avenge his boss. Before he could pull the trigger, he was struck by a vertical sword slash from top to bottom, splitting his body into 2 pieces. The man with the top knot died instantly, his body cleaved in half to the horror of his companions. The 2 corpses collapsing to the ground froze the remaining curly-haired man, who was drenched in sweat, unable to keep up with Linfan's speed. The curly-haired man frantically realized the previous noise was too loud, certain to attract the surrounding undead. He yelled, warning his companions that the zombies would arrive immediately, urging everyone to get into the car. Seeing all his companions dead, he turned to curse wildly in utter helplessness and extreme fear. As he sprinted towards the car, he turned back to threaten Linfan that the kingpin would make him pay dearly. The curly-haired man screamed for the driver to back up and pick him up, realizing he hadn't made it safely into the car yet. The zombies from the police station, hearing the noise, swarmed out like ants, surrounding all escape routes for the thugs. Linfan mockingly watched the good citizens being surrounded, quipping that they had dug their own graves. He leaped high into the air, leaving a cool final remark that justice is never absent. The curly-haired man and the driver in the car screamed desperately as they realized death had knocked on the car window, accompanied by a horde of hungry zombies. The blaring horn of the truck echoed incessantly, the driver frantically honking as if to awaken hell itself. Wang Zhongguo and Zhou Aijun observed via CCTV, realizing the car horn was deliberately attracting all the zombies in the area to one spot. Linfan broke out in a cold sweat upon hearing the loud noise, realizing the situation was turning extremely dangerous. He signaled the man in the baseball cap to seize the golden opportunity while the undead were distracted, to scavenge for necessities at the nearby store. Old Wang frowned, pointing at the screen, wondering why the truck had turned around and was rushing back into the jaws of death instead of fleeing. Linfan was stunned, a huge question mark appearing above his head at the truck's inexplicable and death-wreaking actions. The truck loomed into view, charging straight ahead with an unstoppable momentum, disregarding all rules of survival. The blonde-haired subordinates were utterly panicked, screaming as they realized the driver intended a suicide attack to drag them all to their graves with him. In his memory, the driver recalled the outbreak of the apocalypse, when he was still an ordinary husband smoking in his truck. When food ran out, he tearfully instructed his wife and child to wait at home while he went out alone to find a way to survive. Who knew that as soon as he left, he was relentlessly pursued by zombies? But fortunately, at a critical moment, a cargo truck appeared. 2 men jumped out of the truck, coordinating smoothly to use shields and iron pipes to send the zombie to its demise in an instant. He wanted to follow but was ignored. Only when he mentioned his hungry wife and child at home did they finally stop to listen. They agreed to shake hands, telling him to bring his family to their shelter, making him astonished, thinking he had found a benefactor in chaotic times. But life was not a dream. As soon as they saw his wife, the beastly nature of these scoundrels immediately revealed itself with lustful eyes. He was tied up, helplessly screaming, as he watched his wife being humiliated right before his eyes, unable to do anything but struggle in vain. His face contorted with pain and hatred, tears mixing with blood as he witnessed the hell on earth descending upon his family. His wife fought desperately to protect her honor, only to be thrown straight from the 3rd floor of the hotel to the ground by those beasts. He watched in numb silence as his wife's corpse lay motionless in a pool of blood, while those bastards even took his daughter hostage to force his obedience. Back in reality, the driver roared a venomous oath, flooring the accelerator to create a terrifying explosion, determined to drag those beasts down to hell with him. Linfan rushed towards the main gate to check the situation, ignoring everyone's calls. The truck was completely surrounded by the undead, smoke billowing from the horrific collision. Linfan stood before the horde of monsters, calmly suggesting they leave the residential area because there were elderly and children here. The undead paused, large question marks appearing above their heads, not understanding what this guy was talking about. His goodwill was met with savage roars and the aggressive charge of the bloodthirsty zombie horde. Linfan sighed, drew his sword, and coldly unleashed a fatal slash, sending the stubborn monsters who refused to heed his advice to their demise. The 2 old men, Wang Zhongguo and Zhou Aijun, watched from afar, stunned and suspecting him to be a super warrior destined to rebuild humanity. Linfan returned with a calm expression, informing Miss Xu that the driver was fine, only slightly bruised. He explained that the driver was protected by the airbag, so he only had a nosebleed. His life was still very tenacious. Linfan looked towards the burning car and the ruined gate, beginning to calculate the damage. He bluntly declared that if the driver didn't clean up the mess he himself caused, who would? The three elders froze upon hearing this, speechless, and unable to refute his overly pragmatic reasoning. The driver slowly crawled up, his face covered in blood, looking around in a daze. He weakly asked a foolish question, wondering if this was heaven. Linfan coldly shattered his illusion, asserting that this was the Sunshine residential area, their home. He ordered the driver to go out later and clean up the zombie corpses before they started to stink. The driver clutched his chest and introduced himself as Chen He. Originally a network maintenance technician, Chen He profusely thanked him but insisted on leaving immediately to rescue his daughter, who was trapped in the thug's den. Linfan shot him a disdainful glance, cutting him off to ask if he intended to cause trouble, and then flee to avoid cleaning up. Linfan changed his attitude, accepting the task of rescuing people on Chen He's behalf for a dirt-cheap fee, demanding that Chen He stay and clean up the mess. Su Xiaoxiao stood on the balcony looking down, her face drained of color when she saw the terrifying figure leading a little girl. Linfan looked up at the window, immediately recognizing the princess-like girl secretly observing him with horrified eyes. He cheerfully waved hello, like a friendly neighbor, with little Ting Ting standing obediently beside him. Su Xiaoxiao flinched, cold sweat pouring down her like a shower when she saw his smile, which she deemed extremely perverse and dangerous. Frightened, she hid behind the curtains, crying hysterically, delusional that since he couldn't catch her, he had kidnapped a child as a substitute. Linfan scratched his head in confusion, wondering if the pressure of the apocalypse had completely short-circuited her mind. He turned to instruct Ting Ting to stay away from mentally unstable individuals like her to preserve her life. In another development, the off-road vehicle of the survivor group from the library was speeding through desolate streets filled with the undead. The guy in the baseball cap sitting in the passenger seat broke out in a cold sweat, his face pale as he saw the increasingly tense and dangerous situation outside. The purple-haired woman and the guy in camouflage sitting in the back seat were equally tense, their sharp eyes observing every movement around them. She suddenly pointed towards the intersection ahead, her voice filled with panic, signaling to her teammates about an unusual event. The whole group realized the madman Linfan was casually standing and gazing into a shop window, completely ignoring the zombie horde. Linfan and Ting Ting were glued to a display case full of stuffed animals, and he excitedly asked the little girl if she wanted one. The purple-haired woman's face turned pale, realizing her car was inadvertently luring the entire zombie horde straight towards the two of them. She shouted loudly, ordering the driver, Old Mao, to honk the car horn loudly to attract the attention of the undead, hoping to relieve Linfan. But the entire group in the car suddenly froze, their eyes wide with shock, when they heard cheerful children's music echoing amidst the bloody battlefield. Linfan and Ting Ting were excitedly activating a singing toy cactus, their smiles radiant as if they were having a picnic amidst a horde of monsters. The cheerful music emanating from the toy immediately provoked and attracted the attention of all the nearby zombies. The undead horde roared furiously, ignoring the library group's car and rushing headlong into Linfan's music party. The group in the car was stunned, realizing they had fretted needlessly. While at the desert base, scientists were making a shocking discovery. In the laboratory, the old professor and his assistant were painstakingly analyzing a strange crystal sample recently collected from zombie brains. The assistant in the protective suit noted that this crystal shell had a bizarre structure, many times harder than human skin. The old professor admitted that even with the base's most advanced equipment, they were stumped by the mystery of this bizarre brain core. He turned to inquire if other major bases like Dragon Palace or Milky Way had made any progress in hunting for crystals. The assistant shook his head, confirming that common zombies yielded no rewards. Only high-level mutated ones dropped this rare item. The old man broke out in a cold sweat, realizing the undead were evolving, and humanity's future seemed bleak if they couldn't find a way to counter them. The scene shifted to another building, where Jiang Hao stood on the rooftop, laughing maniacally, having found a treasure. He blindly believed in web novels, proudly boasting of betraying 7 teammates to seize this glowing red crystal. With greedy eyes, Jiang Hao believed that simply swallowing it would boost his power to overlord levels, allowing him to dominate this entire apocalypse. Without hesitation, he opened his mouth wide, preparing to perform the risky swallowing act to change his life and become the main character. As he swallowed, he indulged in vain fantasies of becoming a king of a realm, changing lovers every day like clothes. A moment later, Jiang Hao stood motionless, his smile gone, the silence chilling, because there was no transformation whatsoever. He clutched his stomach in extreme panic, feeling no power, only a sharp, cramping pain that hit him like a punch to the gut. Jiang Hao gritted his teeth, enduring the pain, still stubbornly believing this was the necessary agony to cleanse his marrow and embark on the demonic path. as often written in stories. He writhed on the floor, agonizing in pain, yet still hypnotized himself with thoughts of a bright future awaiting him. His delusion shattered when he spat out a mouthful of black blood, his body violently reacting to expel the foreign object. Blood flowed from his 7 orifices. Jiang Hao screamed in despair and unwillingness as the ending was not as he dreamed. He fell backward, dying with his eyes wide open, paying a heavy price for his ignorance and delusions of grandeur. Back at the Sunshine residential area, Chen He emotionally embraced his daughter Ting Ting while Linfan observed the reunion. Linfan stood proudly, his clothes covered in gore, calmly reassuring the girl that it was just the blood of the undead, and he was perfectly fine. Wang Zhongguo patted Chen He's shoulder, subtly reminding the driver to promptly pay Linfan his fair compensation for his highly reliable work. Chen He, his face bruised, his hands trembling, handed Linfan the small change along with a thank you filled with awkwardness and fear. Linfan smiled brightly as he took the money, asserting that the truth of money for services was an unshakable principle in his work. He proudly fanned the 100 yuan bill, treating it as a precious trophy, while Chen He stood dumbfounded, unable to comprehend this peculiar preference. Chen, he whispered into Wang Zhongguo's ear, wondering why they had to play this game of commerce when the world was in ruins and money was just worthless paper. Wang Zhongguo sternly explained that fair payment for services was the foundation for re-establishing order in the sunlit community. The tough old man emphasized not to underestimate this transaction, as only order and rules would allow humanity to survive long-term in the apocalypse. Wang Zhongguo and Chen He watched Linfan's retreating back, admitting that they initially thought he was crazy, but now realized it was the mindset of a true master. Chen He broke out in a cold sweat. Though it sounded muddled to his ears, he still nodded, finding the old men's philosophy profound and unpredictable. Suddenly, a deafening chime rang out from the Sunflower Road clock tower, making the entire area tremble. Wang Zhongguo and everyone looked up, realizing that the noon chime was the perfect bait to draw the hordes of undead to one spot. The elderly couple in the base praised the person who fixed the clock as a living saint, igniting hope amidst these chaotic times. Hearing the sound, the zombies immediately activated their hunting instincts, their eyes glowing as they rushed like moths to a flame towards the clock tower. The chime continued to echo across the blue sky, turning the clock tower area into a death trap that attracted thousands of monsters. At the scene, the young man in camouflage carrying a water pipe praised Big Brother Linfan's fainting strategy as utterly brilliant and effective. The purple-haired woman and her companions seized the golden opportunity, rushing in to grab an entire stash of necessities within a mere 2 minutes. While enthusiastically looting, the entire group was startled by a strange noise and the ground shaking, their instincts telling them something big was happening. A colossal monster fell from the sky like a meteor, using its massive body to crush the small fry zombies and create a terrifying impact. The colossal boss fell from the sky like a meteor, preparing for a violent entrance. It let out a terrifying roar, flexing its bulging spiky muscles, challenging the entire map. Its 1,000-pound punch struck down, cracking the ground open and sending rocks flying like an explosion. The top of the clock tower was shattered, bricks and stones raining down before the monster's destructive power. An armored vehicle was crushed like a tin can, while the purple-haired girl on the rooftop watched the horrifying scene in stunned silence. The girl broke out in a cold sweat, her desperate eyes wondering if humanity had any chance left to fight back. The chime abruptly ceased, plunging the area into an ominous silence, signaling ill tidings. Wang Zhongguo firmly asserted that hope still remained, and this time, it was the real deal. The old man began an impassioned lecture to young Linfan about the great responsibility of the strong. The old man placed his hand on the sword hilt, trying to ignite the spark of leadership and enlighten his young charge. Linfan's face went blank, sweat pouring down as he confessed he had no idea what the old man was rambling about. Wang Zhongguo sighed in exasperation, realizing that discussing profound philosophy with this guy was truly like casting pearls before swine. He immediately changed tactics, suggesting a side job of finding survivors to earn a commission. At the mention of money, Linfan's eyes lit up like car headlights, his attitude doing an immediate 180-degree turn. He gleefully accepted the task without hesitation, his spirits soaring, as if he were about to loot legendary treasures. Linfan grabbed his sword and dashed off to complete the mission, leaving the 2 old people staring after him in bewilderment. Xu Guifen worriedly asked if they were tricking a child, but Wang Zhongguo asserted that his strength already surpassed that of ordinary people. The old man looked up at the sky, believing that the seemingly clueless gamer was humanity's last hope. Linfan was walking when he saw a car execute an incredibly sharp drift. He praised the driving skills but bluntly refused a ride, intent on farming money. The purple-haired driver and his female companion decided to step on the gas and leave the young man behind, fearing the engine noise would attract more undead. Looking in the rearview mirror, he shook his head in exasperation, thinking that the kid must be mentally unstable to dare walk among a horde of monsters. Linfan, alone with his sword, boldly stepped into the midst of the roaring, hungry undead horde with the demeanor of a hunter. He drew his sword with a bored expression, viewing the slaughter of these monsters as nothing more than a dull and tedious experience point grind. His sword flashed as it swung, sending zombie heads flying like scattered straw before the overwhelming speed and power of the true gamer. Looking at the piles of corpses strewn at his feet, Linfan realized these creatures were tougher than before, but thanks to the system's support, he could still handle them all. While clearing the battlefield, he looked up when he noticed a strange sign on a nearby high-rise building. On the glass door of the luxury apartment building, bright red SOS pleas for help were plastered, catching his eye and signaling a new mission. In room 1705, Yan Nini, a beautiful dance streamer, was huddled in a corner of the room with a desperate expression. She had been hiding in her home since day one, barely surviving on the meager food supplies she had stored. Memories flooded back to the third day of the apocalypse, when she heard a knock at the door and the familiar, deceptive voice of her manager, Liu Hong. Liu Hong was accompanied by her younger brother, Liu Bing, an idle man with a lecherous, perverse gaze peeking through the door crack. Nini fully understood that in these chaotic times, her manager's sister would certainly assist her brother in harming her if the door opened. She resolved to hold her ground and not open the door, no matter how she was enticed. But now her food supplies were depleted, and death by starvation loomed. Outside, in the 16th floor hallway, Liu Hong was cursing resentfully, because her tempting prey stubbornly refused to open the door. Liu Bing, meanwhile, drooled at the thought of the dance streamer's alluring figure just behind that door. He furiously pounded the wall because the security door was too sturdy. He couldn't brute force his way in to satisfy his beastly desires. His sister scolded him for being too obvious, while he shamelessly scoffed, arguing that in the apocalypse, there was no need to uphold morals. Suddenly, a strange noise echoed, startling both siblings. Liu Bing quickly signaled for silence, fearing zombies might come investigating. Nini sat huddled in her room, trembling with fear that the scoundrel outside would break in and violate her at any moment. Linfan stood before the steel door, knocking a few times politely, like a diligent salesperson. He clicked his tongue in annoyance, feeling that waiting like this was a waste of precious time. Bang! Linfan unleashed a mountain-shattering punch, tearing through the sturdy security door as if it were tofu. Inside, Nini flinched, her hand gripping the kitchen knife tightly, her face drained of all color at the terrifying sound. The shattered door swung open. Linfan stood there with his sword on his back, calmly telling the homeowner not to be nervous, despite having just destroyed their home. He paused for a beat, his eyes lighting up as he recognized the familiar face of the dance streamer, Yan Nini. Linfan changed his demeanor in an instant, excitedly boasting that he was a loyal fan who had donated hundreds of dollars to her whenever he watched her streams. Yan Nini was in extreme panic, pointing the knife at him and screaming, forbidding him from coming closer if she didn't want to see a corpse right there. He was speechless, displaying a dazed, chibi-like expression at her overly dramatic reaction. In Yan Nini's mind, horror movie scenes of women being kidnapped and tortured replayed, fear consuming her entire being. Her eyes shone with desperate determination. She would rather die than let the stranger turn her into a slave. Linfan raised his hands in surrender, claiming to be a real estate agent who had come to rescue her after seeing an SOS signal taped to the window. Yan Nini's face went blank, distorted by confusion. Her brain stalled at a job title completely unrelated to the apocalypse. She broke out in a cold sweat, recalling the punch that tore through the steel door, wondering what normal human could possess such monstrous strength. Linfan observed keenly, noticing that doubt was gradually replacing fear in her eyes. Her psychological defenses had weakened. He smirked triumphantly, deciding to strike while the iron was hot and recruit this potential personnel with his glib tongue. Linfan pulled out an advertising flyer, beginning a multi-level marketing presentation about the absolutely safe Sunshine residential area. The flyer featured a group photo of elite residents, including doctors, teachers, and military personnel, proving the credibility and prestige of this apocalypse-era real estate. Linfan gently used his bare hand to stop her trembling knife as if playing with a child. He disarmed her in an instant, leaving her completely frozen, her brain officially crashing at this absurd display of dominance. Ignoring the tense atmosphere, he calmly reintroduced himself as Linfan, a dedicated real estate agent. He made himself at home, inviting the homeowner to sit on the sofa to discuss business professionally. Linfan spread a map on the table, beginning his pyramid scheme sales pitch for a dream apartment in the apocalypse. He enthusiastically recommended a larger apartment in Building Gnome 2, reasoning that as a streamer, she would surely have many clothes needing storage space. To boost his credibility, he even brought up a former client, Liu Weiwei, as a prime example of his service quality. Yan Nini broke out in a cold sweat, unable to resist asking directly if this man had a mental problem. Linfan feigned offense, scolding her for repaying kindness with enmity when he was kindly offering a great place to stay. He decisively turned his back and walked away, causing her to panic and frantically grab his sleeve, begging him not to leave her behind. Just as he expected, Linfan turned back with a cold yet magnanimous expression, immediately accepting her apology. She was still stunned, wondering if he always behaved so strangely and unusually. Linfan retorted sharply, posing a rhetorical question about who was truly abnormal in this chaotic society. He began to preach, asserting that in the apocalypse, human hearts were even more terrifying than the hordes of undead outside. To him, the old order still existed simply because he was strong enough to maintain a civilized way of life amidst the wild beasts. Yan Nini began to speculate deeply, thinking that he was feigning madness to make enemies drop their guard, rather than actually being crazy. With no other choice, she reluctantly nodded, agreeing to rent the house to escape her precarious situation. Linfan changed his demeanor in an instant, flashing his signature smile and urging the client to pack her bags immediately. He concluded by demanding she bring cash and bank cards to pay the rent, leaving her speechless for a second time. Linfan asked for final confirmation if the streamer had gathered all her belongings after 10 minutes of waiting. Yan Nini nodded in confirmation, but her face was still full of worry, warning about the dangerous survivors lurking downstairs. He reassured his client with an overly confident tone, boasting that he could punch through a security door with a single blow. The door burst open with a dry click, revealing 2 lurkers outside and immediately deflating the atmosphere. Yan Nini broke out in a cold sweat, her face turning pale, as she recognized the people blocking their way were precisely those she feared most. Liu Bing held a gleaming cleaver, threatening Linfan with a chin gesture, demanding he hand over the beauty and get lost if he didn't want to regret it. Instead of fear, Linfan smirked mysteriously, making the thug feel deeply insulted. He offered a sarcastic apology, his eyes as sharp as razors sending shivers down his opponent's spine. In just a split second, with a thwack, Linfan had closed in and disarmed the thug so quickly that the naked eye couldn't follow. Liu Bing stood frozen, stammering incoherently as he realized his knife was already in his opponent's hand. He was in extreme panic mentally, unable to believe that the young man's reaction speed far surpassed common sense and science. Linfan held the cleaver, lecturing the enemy about law and order, his tone like an exemplary official in the apocalypse. Both Yan Nini and the thug were dumbfounded, filled with countless question marks, unable to understand what kind of act this freak was putting on. He unexpectedly returned the knife to Liu Bing, advising him not to do wrong things anymore, with a nonchalant expression. Liu Bing tremblingly took back the weapon while Linfan added a warning, heavily implying a setup, about the right to legitimate self-defense if attacked. The thug was completely psychologically manipulated to the point of confusion, standing dumbfounded, unsure whether to attack or flee. Liu Hong stood beside him, anxiously calling her brother's name, trying to awaken him from his daze in this bizarre situation. Linfan acted as if nothing had happened, coldly ordering Yan Nini to continue, leaving the other 2 standing rooted to the spot. Being completely ignored, Liu Bing's shame turned to rage. He yelled, demanding they both stop, his face filled with extreme bitterness and humiliation. The thug Liu Bing revealed his lecherous nature, admitting he had coveted Yan Nini's body for a long time and would not let her go easily. He turned to attack Linfan, using his own filthy mindset to accuse him of also wanting to possess her body, just like himself. To terrorize his prey, Liu Bing painted a hellish scenario where Yan Nini would be tormented by dozens of ugly, obese men, making her wish for death. He spread his arms, lecturing about this lawless world, shamelessly asserting that staying to serve him alone was the wisest choice. Linfan frowned, having heard too much garbage, and coldly ordered the man to shut his mouth to prevent further auditory pollution. In his delusion, Liu Bing reassured himself that he was disarmed only due to an oversight and still believed he could turn the tables to claim the beauty for himself. His bloodlust ignited. He charged straight at Linfan with his knife, radiating murderous intent, screaming that he would hack his opponent to death. Liu Hong stood outside, frantically shouting a warning, though it was unclear who she was worried about in this situation of vastly different power levels. This scheming woman, it turned out, still sided with her younger brother, intending to wait for Yan Nini to make a mistake so Liu Bing could deal with Linfan. But before he could even make a move, Liu Bing was sent flying by an extremely powerful force, like a tattered sandbag. His entire body slammed hard into the wall, creating a large crack, causing Liu Hong to scream her brother's name in horror and despair. Linfan lowered his foot after the lightning-fast kick, maintaining an unperturbed expression and asserting that this was entirely a legitimate act of self-defense. Liu Hong froze, drenched in sweat, as she witnessed the overwhelming power that made her brother vanish in the blink of an eye. Without even glancing at the pile of trash he had just cleared, Linfan turned and signaled Yan Nini to leave immediately. As the two walked away leisurely, Liu Hong rushed to help her younger brother, who lay flattened on the ground like a cockroach. Entering the stairwell area, Yan Nini was stunned and asked if Linfan had single-handedly slaughtered all these scattered zombies. She shivered in fear, seeing the hideous mutated monster corpses mercilessly torn apart. Linfan casually admitted his achievement, but didn't forget to add his catchphrase. He was forced to act because they attacked first. When she heard Linfan insist he was just a real estate agent, Yan Nini was half skeptical, secretly thinking this guy was definitely a hidden final boss, just like in movies. Linfan and Yan Nini strode through the streets. He calmly explained that even in chaotic times, one still had to earn money to support oneself, regardless of the circumstances. He nonchalantly asserted that his main job was to guard the neighborhood and run errands for residents to earn extra income, not to be some kind of agent. Upon hearing this, Yan Nini's eyes lit up like headlights. She self-dramatized that he was the Dragon King's son-in-law, or a hidden ultimate boss from urban legends. She laughed gleefully, thinking she had struck gold, while Linfan looked at her with an expression as if he were looking at someone intellectually challenged. The scene shifted to a confrontation. Liu Bing held a cleaver, intending to act like a thug, and slashed directly at Linfan's face to assert dominance. Before he could even blink, the cleaver in the freckled man's hand had vanished, and was neatly in Linfan's grasp, without him even realizing it. Liu Bing broke out in a cold sweat, his face drained of color, as his brain couldn't process his opponent's godlike speed. Linfan held the cleaver and lectured him at length about safety rules and the law. Like a truly diligent security guard uncle, Liu Bing stood dumbfounded, his face full of question marks, completely short-circuited by this surreal situation. Linfan returned the cleaver to him as if giving a toy to a child, advising him not to play foolishly lest he bring disaster upon himself. Holding the weapon again, Liu Bing remained stiff as a board, unable to process the information just fed into his mind due to the immense disparity in skill. Liu Hong stood at the door, stunned, witnessing her brother being completely outplayed, cold sweat streaming down her face. She felt a pang of guilt, remembering how she once considered Yan Nini like a younger sister, but was now aiding her useless brother in harming her. Linfan didn't bother to linger with the trash. He coldly turned his back and signaled everyone to leave immediately. Liu Bing was furious at being ignored, straining his neck to shout, demanding the group stop, unwilling to let his prey escape. The freckled man rushed out to block their path with a resentful expression, trying to salvage his last shred of dignity with hopeless aggression. The tension returned as the useless man adamantly refused to let go, his eyes fixed on Yan Nini. Liu Bing revealed his lecherous nature, threatening that there were only bad people outside to psychologically manipulate Yan Nini into staying and serving him. Linfan delivered a chilling final remark, exposing the freckled man's despicable lust and disrespectful attitude towards women. Liu Bing resorted to specious reasoning, enticing his prey by saying the world had fallen apart, and staying here to serve him was the best option. Linfan, fed up, cut short the pile of rubbish theories, telling him to stop stuffing such nonsense into other people's heads. The freckled man resentfully blamed Linfan for interfering, reassuring himself that he had only been disarmed earlier due to his own carelessness. Driven mad by resentment, Liu Bing swung his cleaver and charged in a frenzy, screaming that he would hack his opponent to death. Yan Nini screamed a panicked warning as she saw the madman charging from behind. In his delusion, the useless man still thought he could turn the tables, believing that he could defeat Linfan if only he created an opportunity. Without further words, Linfan unleashed a lightning-fast kick the moment his opponent closed in. The powerful kick sent Liu Bing flying straight into the wall, creating a loud impact that cracked the bricks and stones. Yan Nini's eyes widened in astonishment at the young man's reflexes and overwhelming strength. She couldn't believe her eyes, seeing the freckled man blown away by a single, simple strike in an instant. Linfan coldly turned his back and walked away as if nothing had happened, signaling her to follow immediately. Liu Bing was stuck to the cracked wall, and his older sister, Liu Hong, frantically rushed to support her precious, groaning younger brother. Even after being beaten to a pulp, the despicable man still tried to salvage his dignity, stammering to his sister that he was only defending himself. Going down the corpse-strewn staircase, Yan Nini shivered and asked if all these monsters had been dealt with by Linfan. Linfan calmly stepped over the pile of corpses, nonchalantly replying that they attacked first, so he was forced to act in self-defense. Seeing the hideous, multi-eyed, mutated corpse, the dancer cried out in terror at the monster's brutality. Unable to suppress her curiosity, she pressed him again about his true profession, but Linfan still insisted he was just a real estate agent. Yan Nini was half skeptical, feeling that this scenario was exactly like those movies about reclusive masters working ordinary jobs to conceal their power. Linfan spun a fantastical tale, claiming his main job was neighborhood security guard and errand runner for extra income, which made Yan Nini ecstatic, convinced she had found a great hidden master. Linfan looked at Yan Nini, who was laughing gleefully, with a weary expression, secretly thinking that this girl, though beautiful, was a bit simple-minded for falling completely for his trick. A brave yellow dog dashed out the door, beginning its suicidal mission amidst heroic music playing in its head. The dog's back was covered with loudly ringing phones, luring the foolish horde of zombies to chase after it like ducks hearing thunder. The bald water plant worker was hiding, lamenting having to eat dog food to survive but still worrying about the city's water supply system. Taking advantage of the dog luring the monsters away, the bald man mustered all his courage to venture out and check the equipment, determined not to give up. The horde of undead was led by the nose, by the phone ringing, chasing the poor dog, which fled at top speed across the yard. Running smoothly, the dog suddenly braked hard, its fur standing on end, whimpering as it sensed a strong killing intent ahead. A speed variant mutated zombie with bulging muscles and a hideous cluster of eyes blocked its path, scaring the dog out of its wits. The monster charged like an arrow, and the yellow dog could only run for its life, tears welling in its eyes. With nowhere left to run, the dog cowered in a corner, whimpering in despair as the monster opened its mouth, ready to devour it. A rapidly spinning bicycle wheel appeared, signaling the imminent intervention of a formidable individual. As Linfan casually rode his bicycle, he encountered an unpleasant sight. He curiously observed the mutated zombie with an utterly nonchalant expression, as if he were merely out shopping. Instead of fear, he raised his hand to greet the monster in a friendly manner, as if meeting a neighbor. "Hello there." Enraged by the blatant disrespect, the monster ignored the dog and turned, snarling, to lunge at the audacious individual. Linfan remained completely unfazed, his hand resting on his sword hilt, as he gently advised his opponent not to act rashly, stating he harbored no ill will. Disregarding the friendly warning, the monster pounced, forcing Linfan to draw his sword to enact self-defense justice. A sharp sword stroke tore through the air, cleaving the speed-type zombie in half in an instant, and the system reported a satisfying 3 points gained. The monster's corpse disintegrated, leaving behind a sparkling, fiery red crystal that dropped like loot for the victor. Linfan propped up his bicycle, stood tall with his broadsword, and delivered a hypocritical lecture, stating he had told it not to fight, but it wouldn't listen. The obedient yellow dog looked at its savior, its tail wagging furiously, showing absolute submission after its life was saved. Linfan affectionately patted its head, gently asking his canine companion to lead the way to where the survivors were hiding. He leisurely cycled behind, ignoring the ringing phone on the dog's back that was attracting the surrounding undead like a magnet. A foolish zombie lunged out to block his path, only to have its head instantly severed by Linfan's swinging sword, splattering blood everywhere without him even sparing a glance. As he cycled, he heartily praised the dog's intelligence, treating this journey like a stroll in the park. Both entered a dark corridor area of the factory, where the dog suddenly stopped, sniffing cautiously. It ran in circles and barked loudly in front of a closed iron door, signaling that the important target was right behind it. Linfan smiled, reassuring his four-legged companion, and gestured for it to lead the way naturally, allowing him to handle the rest. Inside the water treatment plant's chlorine processing room, a gloomy and silent atmosphere enveloped the cramped, machinery-filled space. The bald employee sat with his knees drawn up on the floor, his gaunt face clearly showing extreme despair from being isolated for too long. He clutched his head, screaming in silent agony, tormenting himself with the fear that his beloved dog had perished outside among the bloodthirsty undead. Suddenly, the familiar sound of barking echoed, startling him. His eyes widened in astonishment, as if he couldn't believe his own hearing. He stared wide-eyed at the door, sweat pouring off him, trying to convince himself that it was merely a hallucination born of extreme fear. A polite inquiry from outside echoed in, causing him to fall backward, his heart pounding and legs trembling, unable to believe his ears any longer. He tremblingly wondered how anyone could survive in this hellish place, or if his mind had completely succumbed to madness. With a resounding crash, the sturdy iron door was shattered into fragments by sharp sword strikes, and the light of hope flooded into the dark room. Linfan stepped in with a radiant smile, confidently and dominantly introducing himself as the neighborhood security guard who had come to rescue people. The employee burst into sobbing tears, snot and tears streaming down his face, believing this to be a fantastical dream before his death. Linfan placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, causing the man to burst with emotion, rushing to embrace his savior and crying like a child who had received a gift. The water plant worker cried while devouring rice like a starving man, making Linfan's entire team watch with concern. Yan Nini and Ting Ting whispered to each other, suspecting he was the reincarnation of a rice bucket due to his enthusiastic consumption of plain rice. Linfan wondered why Ting Ting called the streamer Big Sister when she looked so young and their seniority didn't match. He leaned in and explained that the girl had already been psychologically manipulated by him, so she should just play along, leaving the little girl utterly speechless. The golden dog looked bewildered, not understanding why that man had happily shared its dog food this morning but was now complaining about hardship. The bald man scratched his head in embarrassment for eating too much, but Liu Hong quickly reassured him that being able to eat was a great blessing in these times. Manager Liu Hong gently apologized because the unexpected guests meant she hadn't had time to prepare a lavish feast. Old man Wang Zhongguo patted his shoulder and praised the young man for his hard work in maintaining the clean water plant for the entire city. The old man asserted that saving the water source in the apocalypse was a tremendous achievement and not merely simple labor. Linfan seized the opportunity to activate his real estate agent mode, offering the worker a rental unit in the Sunshine apartment complex with an aggressive, multi-level marketing-like sales pitch. The bald man's eyes widened, his face blank like a stunned goose at the outrageous pivot from saving people to real estate business. Wang Zhongguo played along perfectly, explaining the rent and payment rules as if society was still functioning normally. The worker broke out in a cold sweat, his mind reeling between understanding and not understanding the bizarre logic of this group. Liu Hong gave a wry smile and told him to get used to it gradually, because only Old Man Wang could tune into Linfan's crazy frequency here. Old Man Wang began to lecture on principles, praising the hidden courage beneath the man's timid and ordinary exterior. Looking at the young man, the old man wistfully recalled the glorious, fiery years of his youth when he was in the military. He spoke of a comrade who looked like a weak scholar, unable to tie a chicken, but dared to embrace explosives and charge at an enemy tank in a critical situation. Wang Zhongguo concluded with a philosophical statement that people only reveal their true character and courage in moments of life and death. The bald man nodded, realizing this old man was indeed a master of rhetoric and a highly reputable life consultant. Linfan closed the deal on apartment 504 for a dirt-cheap price, making the naive customer immediately ask if he should pay by card or cash to move in. Linfan switched to shrewd merchant mode, demanding rent immediately, his eyes shining like stars, making the worker break out in a cold sweat due to his pragmatism. Old Man Wang patted the bald man's shoulder to reassure him, saying that this young man was extravagant because he didn't have a wife to manage his finances, which was why he was so strict. The bald man was utterly shocked when he heard the old man say that rent would be deducted from his salary, a concept so luxurious it was laughable in this apocalypse. The worker regained his composure, turning to inquire if Linfan could truly handle the undead to plan for the long term. Linfan confidently gave a thumbs up, showing off his formidable 255 strength stats, asserting that he was the real deal, not someone to be underestimated. Old Man Wang nodded, confirming his credibility, acting as a trustworthy guarantor for his nephew, which made the bald man start to relent. He turned to ask the two beautiful girls standing nearby to double-check the safety of this contract. Yan Nini smiled brightly like a flower, affirming that Linfan was not just strong, but a true monster who could clear the entire map. The worker mustered all his courage to ask Linfan to escort him to the water plant for his routine midday inspection because he didn't dare venture out alone. Linfan stretched and readily agreed, treating a trip into a zombie nest as casually as going to the market, then turned and headed back to his room to rest. Watching the formidable figure depart, the bald man wondered to Old Man Wang about the true identity of this superhuman, as his aura was far too different from ordinary people. The old man began his familiar speech, declaring that times create heroes and anyone who dared to rise in adversity was a hero. Wang Zhongguo concluded that origin didn't matter. What mattered was working together to build hope for the community in this apartment complex. The scene shifted to the desert base in the quiet depths of the night, where the military and scientific community were frantically operating in secret. Inside the modern laboratory, scientists were analyzing disastrous failed data sent from other bases. The bespectacled female doctor announced the catastrophic test results from having volunteer soldiers ingest zombie crystals in search of power. The footage showed the host's blood vessels mutating to pitch black, screaming in extreme agony before perishing in just 3 short minutes. She concluded that ordinary human bodies could not withstand the crystal energy, and simultaneously displayed the classification of dangerous zombie strains discovered. The screen displayed the strength zombie type, a muscular monster capable of flipping 2-ton cars with skin so tough that bullets couldn't penetrate it. Next was the speed zombie type, with climbing abilities and speed surpassing even a cheetah. A true nightmare for anyone slow-footed. The female doctor warned about a new zombie type whose scream reached 160 decibels, powerful enough to rupture eardrums and more dangerous than any previous variant. The old professor and his colleagues looked at each other in despair, wondering if humanity had any chance left to turn the tide. In another desolate street corner, the undead still roamed aimlessly with hungry bellies, awaiting the unfortunate. Gu Hang, a third-class sergeant visiting home just as the pandemic hit, was observing the dire situation outside through binoculars. He recounted the precarious situation of the current survivor group, including a pregnant woman about to give birth and her weak husband. The husband anxiously inquired about the situation outside, but Gu Hang could only give a blunt answer that everything was ruined. The man frantically confided that his wife was about to give birth, and the baby's cries would surely be a beacon, summoning the entire zombie horde to a feast. Gu Hang placed a hand on the man's shoulder, reassuring him with the firm demeanor of a soldier that he would carry the team. Despite his brave words, deep down he fully understood that giving birth in the apocalypse without medical assistance was a gamble with 9 chances of death and 1 of life. He decided to go out and scavenge, and flatly rejected the husband's intention to accompany him, asserting that only his military physique was capable of surviving. The weak husband urged his benefactor to be careful, while Gu Hang promised to run for his life, hit and run, if he encountered the undead. The man hastily stopped him, his face pale as he corrected him that what he feared was not the stupid zombies outside. He tremblingly mentioned rumors about a legend, 1 man, 1 sword, spreading among the survivors in this area. In the imagination of the weak, it was an immortal phantom, a solitary butcher strolling through hordes of undead as if going to the market. Gu Hang walked out the door with a puzzled expression, wondering what that cheesy title, Immortal Evergreen Vine, actually meant. The scene shifted back to the happy apartment complex, where Linfan was busy with a packed schedule, from patrolling and cleaning shops to escorting the water plant worker. Wang Zhongguo watched the young man's departing back with proud eyes, seeing him as the last hope to shoulder this ruined world. In a peaceful corner of the rooftop, teacher Liang Yan was patiently lecturing the children, maintaining a glimmer of knowledge amidst the chaos. Under the afternoon sun, the young mother, carrying her child, happily offered to help Mrs. Xu Guifeng tend to the lush green vegetable garden, a strangely peaceful scene. Yan Nini, in a tight-fitting workout outfit, ran to block Linfan's path, coquettishly demanding that he call her by an intimate name, launching a powerful romantic offensive. Linfan nodded blankly, agreeing to let the matter drop with the trailing streamer. Yan Nini walked along, wondering if this ruined city could truly revive, as Mr. Wang had boasted. She firmly asserted that only after meeting this formidable team did she dare to place her trust in such a distant prospect. Linfan turned to offer a pleasing philosophical remark, saying that since she already possessed faith, she should simply act on it. Still not giving up, she pressed him again, asking why he kept obsessively earning money, while others outside were looting for quick gains. Seeing Linfan remain silent, she fantasized in her mind that he was planning far ahead for humanity's future, truly the vision of a savior. Yan Nini seized the opportunity to flirt aggressively with the classic question of whether he had a girlfriend, but received a cold no in return. She didn't give up, continuing to tempt him by asking if he intended to date, only for Linfan to douse her with a cold splash by saying, "I have no need." Yan Nini froze completely, her face turning purple as if struck by lightning, due to the blunt and merciless rejection. She frantically chased after him, explaining that she was only 20 years old and in her prime, wondering how he could reject her so cruelly. Linfan ignored her tantrum, shouldered his sword, and walked straight ahead, declaring he would clean up the trashy zombies in the area to clear his sight. Yan Nini stood dumbfounded, then deluded herself into thinking that her vision was too narrow to comprehend his grand ambition of bringing order to the world. The scene of blue skies and white clouds was strangely peaceful, a stark contrast to the monsters lurking within the buildings. In a luxurious villa nearby, Su Xiaoxiao trembled, hiding behind the curtains and observing the strange man below. Linfan stood in the yard, looking up, secretly judging that the girl must have mental issues to be hiding so furtively. He stretched, drawing the fake Frostmourne from his back, preparing to begin his daily monster clearing and leveling session. Seeing him draw his sword, Su Xiaoxiao panicked intensely, thinking the killer was about to rush in and butcher her to satisfy his bestial urges. Linfan suddenly paused, remembering he had promised to perform a special smile-based psychological therapy for this patient. He tried to force out a smile he believed to be the friendliest and most radiant to reassure the frightened girl upstairs. But in Su Xiaoxiao's eyes, it was the most lewd and perverse smile she had ever seen, making her so scared her heart nearly fell out. Gu Hang ransacked the pharmacy, but life wasn't like the movies. There were no pills left for him to loot. A strange sound echoed, startling him, and his survival instincts immediately went on red alert. Even as a former soldier with superhuman physique, he still broke out in a cold sweat at the thought of fighting zombies bare-handed. The best strategy was to flee, so he decided to make an immediate tactical retreat to preserve his life. A female zombie with a mutated face covered in hideous boils lunged out from a hidden corner, blocking his path. Gu Hang ran for his life, utilizing his speed to outdistance the slow zombies behind him. The monster stared blankly after the fleeing silhouette of its prey, which had already bolted out the door before it could react. In another development, Linfan, while beheading a zombie, rambled on about how he was merely acting in righteous self-defense against these corrupted monsters. He admired the fake Frostmourne, feeling as if it had just received a damage buff and was glowing fantastically. While admiring his weapon, he heard chaotic screams echoing from outside in the streets. With the demeanor of a final boss, he carried his sword and walked to the door to see who dared to make such a ruckus. Outside, Gu Hang was cornered on the roof of a bus, forced to kick away a climbing zombie. He held a metal bar in despair, thinking that today would be the end of his life amidst a sea of hungry undead. Linfan suddenly appeared with his signature smile, greeting him casually as if strolling through a park amidst a horde of monsters. Gu Hang was stunned, sensing the aura of a soldier emanating from this strange young man, clearly not an ordinary person. He scrutinized him closely and realized his opponent was the real deal, unusually calm and confident. Not wanting to drag others down with him, Gu Hang yelled at Linfan to run away and leave him behind. Linfan maintained his provocative smirk, asking again if the young man needed a hand. Amidst the dense encirclement of the undead, Linfan stood tall like a god, astonishing Gu Hang. Gu Hang broke out in a cold sweat due to the young man's stubbornness, not understanding why he still wouldn't run and just stood there smiling. Linfan stood lecturing the undead about public etiquette, asserting that the sword in his hand was only for self-defense, not for slaying people. A fat zombie roared and lunged, intending to teach him a lesson about harsh reality. Gu Hang broke out in a cold sweat, thinking that this young man would surely die with him because of his ill-timed talkativeness. Linfan swung his sword, creating a beautiful arc, combining it with movements that dodged attacks as smoothly as silk. He unleashed a thunderous kick, sending the giant monster flying and slamming it against the wall, creating a terrifying impact. Gu Hang's jaw dropped in astonishment, wondering if this was reality or a martial arts movie, because even Special Forces soldiers couldn't kick a 160-kilogram mass of flesh that far. The entire horde of red-eyed undead furiously charged, besieging Linfan from all sides. Linfan descended from above with an extremely cool pose, declaring he would use the Frostmourne to enlighten these stubborn monsters. Gu Hang froze completely, wondering what that cheesy and juvenile line was all about. Linfan wielded his sword like an artist, slicing the undead into small pieces in the blink of an eye. He stood amidst the piled-up corpses, lamenting about dirtying the streets and worrying about the efforts of the sanitation workers. Gu Hang stared at the bloody battlefield, unable to believe his eyes, doubting whether that guy was even human. Suddenly, Gu Hang remembered something, pointing at Linfan with a look as if he had just discovered the truth. Gu Hang shouted excitedly, bestowing upon him the resounding nicknames, the Immortal Ivy of Huang City, or the Undying Spectre of the Apocalypse. Linfan turned back with a bewildered, questioning look, not understanding what that buzz-cut guy was rambling about. With a slight crouch, he instantly leaped onto the towering bus roof, startling Gu Hang. Linfan stood proudly, introducing himself politely, as if at a job interview. Gu Hang was still in shock, secretly thinking that the effortless jump just now definitely didn't belong to the realm of humans. Seeing the other party just standing there dumbfounded, Linfan scratched his head, wondering if the guy was deaf for not answering. Gu Hang snapped back to reality, hastily stated his name, and immediately asked for the secret to dealing with such formidable zombies. Linfan showed off his replica, Frostmourne, whose terrifying power made Gu Hang break out in a cold sweat due to its surreal might. He seized the opportunity to switch into diligent real estate agent mode, inviting the soldier to rent a house right in the midst of the chaotic apocalypse. Gu Hang looked at the domineering young man before him, secretly thinking that this guy definitely had severe mental issues. Linfan shoved a flyer into the other's hand, advertising the Sunshine apartment complex as a fully equipped resort paradise. Trusting Linfan's overwhelming power, Gu Hang nodded immediately, sealing the rental deal on the spot. Gu Heng asked permission to go back and pick up his hiding comrades, and Linfan agreed without hesitation. As dusk fell, the entire group, accompanied by a pregnant woman, safely arrived at the entrance of the Sunshine apartment complex. Linfan curiously inquired about their relationship, and Gu Heng quickly clarified that this was Yang Hui, a stranger he had rescued. He wondered where her husband was. To leave his wife and child in such a plight, Gu Heng lowered his head, uttering a chilling remark that the husband was already dead. Linfan leaned in, whispering to hear the gossip, as Gu Heng began to recount the melodramatic story. Recalling the past, Yang Hui's group had once encountered another survival team, fully armed to the teeth. Those people scorned the pregnant woman as a burden, stipulating that they would only accept the husband, but absolutely not the wife. The despicable husband didn't hesitate for a second, running off with the new team, abandoning his wife and child amidst a horde of zombies. When Gu Heng returned, he only saw Yang Hui abandoned helplessly. Truly, the human heart was more terrifying than demons. After finishing the story, Gu Heng looked at Linfan worriedly, fearing that he too would consider the pregnant woman a burden and drive her away. Linfan smiled brightly, asserting that customers were paramount, and he would accept anyone, pregnant or not. Suddenly, Yang Hui clutched her belly, groaning, her face pale as labor pains struck. As Gu Heng panicked intensely, Xu Guifan appeared just in time like a savior. Linfan reassured Gu Heng that the old lady was a genuine military doctor, and this case could be left to her. The scene outside the building was quiet, but inside, tension was high with questions about Xu Guifen's situation. Xu Guifan, wearing a tightly fitted mask, delivered the grim news that the pregnant woman was about to give birth, but the sanitary conditions here were terrible and full of risks. Linfan, carrying his greatsword on his shoulder, coldly declared that giving birth in these times was no different from strolling through the gates of death. He turned his back and walked away decisively, leaving Wang Zhongguo bewildered, not understanding where the young man intended to go in this critical situation. Linfan smiled confidently, telling them to let her scream freely, because he would personally guard the main gate, ensuring no single creature would get through. Gu Heng, anxious, wanted to find a safer hiding place, but Linfan brushed him off with a nonchalant attitude, asserting that danger was not an issue. He fabricated a quote from some general about fighting to buy time for a new life to be born, to reassure his comrades. The images of Yan Nini and Ting Ting appeared as vivid proof of the hope for the future he was referring to. A newborn baby, red and fragile, symbolized the seed of life that all the adults had to shed blood to protect and leave for future generations. Linfan stepped into the darkness, declaring that he had to work to earn the 5,000 yuan per month security guard salary he had fabricated for himself. Ting Ting innocently turned to ask Wang Zhongguo which general had uttered such a profound philosophical statement, making the old man break out in a cold sweat. Wang Zhongguo quickly fabricated a story about the Long March and some General Dong to cover up Linfan's boastful words. The old man spun a divine tale about a female soldier giving birth amidst enemy encirclement and a superior's order to fight to the death to protect the delivery. Wang Zhongguo immersed himself in the fabricated story, passionately delivering a speech about the soldiers' bloody sacrifices for future generations. Linfan sat grandly right at the main gate, his sword plunged into the ground, forming an impenetrable steel barrier, muttering about the ideal of protecting children. He leisurely sat reading the novel Stark and 365 Girlfriends with an expression of enjoyment, as if on vacation in the middle of the apocalypse. The roar of an engine shattered the quiet atmosphere as a strange car sped towards the residential complex gate. The heavily reinforced off-road vehicle screeched to a halt right in front of the security guard who was sitting reading a book in the middle of the road as if it were deserted. The strange driver, shotgun in hand, looked at Linfan through the window with eyes as if seeing an alien creature for daring to sit there reading. He poked his head out, asking in confusion, only to receive Linfan's nonchalant reply that he was reading, which silenced him. The whole group in the car burst into laughter, mocking the young man reading as mentally deficient. The driver suggested to Brother Hao that they should kill and rob, seeing that the neighborhood gate was heavily fortified. Brother Hao looked at Linfan with contempt, thinking he was crazy for sitting and reading in these chaotic times. The subordinates eagerly gave thumbs up, praising Brother Hao to the skies for his cruel shrewdness. Linfan remained glued to his book, coldly dismissing the visitors with a nonchalant tone. He explained that someone in the complex was about to give birth, and the screams would attract zombies, so he demanded that these people leave immediately. The purple-haired woman burst into laughter, treating Linfan's serious warning as mere entertainment. Linfan looked up, his sharp gaze demanding that the other party show minimum respect. She flared up at being called Little Sister, aggressively declaring herself an assassin who could kill him in minutes. Brother Hao stepped out of the car, pointing the gun directly at Linfan's face to display his power. Facing the dark muzzle, Linfan calmly confirmed it was a gun, as if teaching a child. The man with the gun began to ramble on about his apocalypse philosophy, where money was trash and he could indulge his bestial desires. He smugly declared that he could do anything he wanted and no one could stop him. The sick man described the pleasure of blowing someone's head off like smashing a watermelon. Linfan unexpectedly quoted Article 128 of the Criminal Code regarding the crime of illegal weapon possession with a serious expression. He warned that this act could result in imprisonment from 3 to 7 years and advised the other party to turn back. Brother Hao froze completely, cold sweat pouring down as he couldn't understand what kind of act this guy was putting on. The subordinates in the car also stared wide-eyed, looking at each other in confusion at the unexpected civics lesson. The driver, bewildered, asked his boss again if they were really breaking the law. Brother Hao burst out laughing to reassure his subordinates, asserting that the law was dead and he could shoot anyone he pleased. Brother Hao floored the accelerator, choosing to flee rather than confront them directly. The armored car reversed sharply. He argued that since the opponent had a gun, retreating was the wisest course. The gang leader immediately yelled at his subordinates to shut up, trying to hide his own cowardice. As he frantically drove away, he muttered vows to return for revenge later. A piercing scream echoed from the apartment complex, tearing through the quiet night. The hordes of undead outside the iron gate began to be strongly agitated by the loud sound emanating from within. Gu Hang was extremely worried that the pregnant woman's screams would turn this place into a monster magnet. The two children, Ting Ting and the white-haired girl, steadfastly affirmed their faith in Uncle Lin. Old Man Wang was touched by their obedience and promised to reward them with a pile of homework. Linfan swung his sword, cutting a sharp arc through the air to intimidate the monsters. The painful screams of the woman in labor continued to echo from the window. Inside the makeshift delivery room, Elder Shu and everyone else were giving their all to help the pregnant woman give birth. Linfan stood proudly on the edge of the wall, calmly facing the approaching storm of undead. The windows on every floor shattered as the zombies began to pour out like a waterfall to hunt for prey. Hordes of undead fell freely from above, creating a horrifying scene of raining corpses. They crashed violently onto the ground but were not completely dead, their limbs flailing wildly. A female zombie landed by crushing the head of another of its kind, splattering blood everywhere. The monsters, barely scrambling to their feet, immediately roared wildly and charged towards their sole prey. Linfan looked at the crippled but still bloodthirsty monster, then uttered sarcastic words full of contempt. Gu Hang stood on the balcony, observing the chaotic situation below with a tense expression. Old Man Wang sternly corrected Gu Hang, asserting that his current zeal would only turn him into a burden, hindering Linfan. Gu Hang bowed his head, accepting the order, bitterly admitting that if he went down there, he would only be dead weight, dragging down the living legend. The entire group on the balcony was stunned when they discovered a zombie with strange behavior standing still on the roof of the opposite building, instead of charging in to tear them apart. The skinny monster with the gaping maw began to open its mouth wide, preparing to unleash a deadly sonic attack. Gu Hang broke out in a cold sweat, wondering why this monster was stationed there, observing from afar with such terrifying composure. A massive sound wave, visible to the naked eye, shot out from the monster's mouth, sweeping across the entire area like a storm. The deafening scream made Gu Hang's group and Old Man Wang painfully cover their ears, feeling as if their eardrums were about to burst due to the terrifying decibel intensity. In the delivery room, Yang Hui, writhing on the bed, also suffered double the pain from the scream, and the entire midwifery team frantically tried to shield her. Yan Nini hastily shouted instructions to everyone to tear cotton and stuff it into their ears to protect the pregnant woman from this sonic attack. The sound intensity was too great, making Gu Hang and Old Man Wang grimace. Its destructive power could truly cause brain damage. Linfan, standing in the eye of the storm, also had to grimace and cover his ears, realizing that this scream was sharp enough to pierce even his usual composure. He immediately identified his priority target as that screaming zombie. He had to silence it immediately before the situation completely spiraled out of control. Without a second's hesitation, Linfan pushed off the ground and charged, his sharp gaze locked onto the rampaging boss. Corpses strewn across the ground violently shook under the impact of the terrifying sound waves, signaling a new wave of attacks. Hundreds of zombies frantically charged forward like a disturbed ant colony, their hunting instincts agitated to the extreme by the scream. Under the moonlight, high-level mutated creatures with grotesque forms, such as tentacled mouths or heads full of eyes, also began to emerge and join the horde. Su Xiaoxiao trembled as she peeked through the curtains, her beautiful face drained of all color at a sight she had never witnessed in her life. The entire street below was filled with a sea of undead, thousands of monsters jostling each other, creating a scene of hell on earth. Surrounding equipment and structures vibrated violently. The sound waves continued to spread to summon every monster within the nearby radius. Linfan looked back at the surging sea of monsters, admitting that the number of enemies had surpassed normal game levels and become ridiculous. As the wooden gate creaked open, Linfan was forcefully pushed from behind by Yan Nini, accompanied by her urging him to flee. He turned to look at the girl standing there, wondering why she wasn't inside helping Yang Hui with the delivery. Yan Nini's eyes welled up with tears. She cried out that she did it because she was too worried about that idiot. Him. Linfan placed a hand on her head to reassure her, firmly telling her to go back because if he retreated, the entire apartment complex would be doomed. To Nini's trembling question of whether he was scared, Linfan honestly admitted that he was scared out of his wits. Despite his fear, he affirmed that he would not retreat, standing alone to block the bloodshot sea of undead waiting to devour everything. A gigantic foot stomped the ground, revealing a mutated zombie with bulging muscles, like a living tank. The monster roared and charged to attack, but Linfan, with his divine reflexes, had already taken a stance, ready to meet the challenge. A sharp sword slash tore through the air. The glowing blade cut straight into the monster's steel-hard body. The giant zombie was cleanly split in half. Black blood splattered everywhere as Linfan coldly sheathed his sword. He looked at the replica Frostmourne, glowing brilliantly, feeling that its power had far surpassed that of an ordinary toy. Linfan put forth a crazy hypothesis that slaughtering zombies was actually causing this weapon to evolve and grow exponentially stronger. On the rooftop, the sonic zombie again opened its gaping maw and screamed, creating ear-splitting, brain-rattling shockwaves in the air. The scream agitated the horde of undead below, causing them to frantically push and shove each other, surging forward like a rabid pack. Linfan panted, drenched in sweat, realizing that these monsters kept surging forward, wave after wave without end. He stood alone before the iron gate, gripping his sword tightly, facing hundreds of zombies that were blocking every path. The water plant worker stood high above, looking down, his face drained of all color, trembling as he wondered if this was hell on earth. A man tightly embraced two children, shielding them from the brutal scene and the bleak future ahead. Gu Heng stood observing, stunned, comparing this sea of zombies to the catastrophe in the movie World War Z he had once watched. He clenched his hands on the windowsill, recalling the thought of wanting to commit suicide if he encountered such a scene in a movie. But now, reality was many times more brutal. Gu Heng stood on the balcony, looking out at the disaster outside, his voice trembling as he asked old Wang if there was truly any hope left. Wang Zhongguo immediately corrected his subordinate's mindset, asserting that as long as there was one person who dared to believe, hope would not die out. The old man pointed towards the fighting figure below, declaring grandly that Linfan himself was the embodiment of hope protecting this apartment complex. Old Wang grabbed Gu Heng's shoulder, shaking him back to his senses, and delivered a profound statement about life and death having meaning, which jolted the former soldier awake. Gu Heng watched the old man's retreating back, secretly admiring old Wang's courage and ability to be a solid moral support whenever Linfan was absent. It turned out Wang Zhongguo was also sweating profusely from fear, but due to his reputation as a veteran and elder, he was forced to brace himself to prevent the situation from collapsing. The scene shifted to Linfan, the young man wielding his Frostmourne like a meat grinder, decapitating countless zombies blocking his path. A zombie attempting a sneak attack was instantly kicked straight in the face by Linfan, its head crushed into the ground with a gruesome crunch. He stood proudly atop his fallen enemies, but a chill began to creep up his spine as the monsters surged endlessly like a tide. Linfan panted amidst the encirclement, wondering how many living people were left in this city, or if it had already transformed into a colossal nest of the undead. In the midst of the frantic, life-or-death slaughter, he suddenly heard Gu Heng's loud shout calling his name from the building's balcony. Gu Heng yelled out a tactical hint, pointing out that the screaming monster was the very antenna attracting the zombies here. Linfan, while swinging his sword to cleave a zombie in half, shouted back to confirm he understood the plan, telling his comrade to quickly take cover. Gu Heng climbed over the fence and retreated inside, silently entrusting everyone's lives to Linfan's overwhelming ability to carry the team. Linfan focused his hearing intently, and sure enough, he heard a piercing shriek like a sonic wave echoing from afar. He silently thanked his comrade for the timely reminder, his hand still swinging his sword to send a few more zombies to their demise, clearing his path. Having pinpointed his target, Linfan launched himself, leaping onto the wall, beginning an incredibly cool parkour display to approach the boss's location. Looking down from above, his sharp eyes locked onto the mutated zombie screaming atop the opposite building. Linfan descended like a deity, swinging his sword to cleave through a blocking zombie, using it as momentum to rush towards his main target. He fixed his gaze on the enemy, asserting confidently that all the trouble so far stemmed from that monster's mouth. Linfan plummeted like a meteor, muttering curses as his efforts to clear the area over the past few days seemed to have gone completely to waste. He landed with incredible flair, his eyes flashing crimson, challenging the monster to see where it thought it could run. A clean sword stroke cleaved the boss in two, sending it to meet its ancestors instantly, before it could even open its mouth. The system announced points gained, and Linfan stood proudly amidst the pile of corpses, his domineering aura unmatched. The door burst open, and the water plant worker rushed out, shouting the good news that the pregnant woman had safely delivered a healthy baby boy. But the bald man's smile vanished as he witnessed the horrifying scene before his eyes. He trembled, looking at Linfan standing tall on a mountain of zombie corpses, his mouth stammering in terror at his benefactor's overwhelming killing intent. Linfan panted, muttering his absolute resolve not to let any zombie slip into the residential area. Suddenly, exhaustion overwhelmed him, his hand trembled, and the sword slipped from his grasp as his body no longer obeyed. The bald man quickly rushed to support Linfan, his voice choked with remorse for everyone's uselessness that had forced him to carry such a heavy burden for the team. Linfan merely smiled in relief, knowing everyone was safe, displaying the demeanor of a true elder brother. He collapsed into his comrade's arms, officially shutting down after the unimaginable zombie slaughter. The scene shifted to a peaceful space with the sound of running water, Linfan relaxing in a bathtub. He opened his eyes, waking up to see Yan Nini gently wiping his face, like a devoted wife tending to her husband. She blushed furiously, hastily explaining that she was only helping him clean the blood off his body and had no ulterior motives. Linfan gave a faint smile of thanks, but then bluntly hinted for her to leave, so he could change. Yan Nini awkwardly turned away, intending to leave the bathroom to give him some privacy. But life is not a dream. Her foot slipped on the soaking wet floor, letting out a startled cry. She fell backward, flying straight into the bathtub where Linfan was stark naked, creating an extremely awkward position. While Yan Nini frantically tried to explain, the bald man lurking outside the door had a massive nosebleed from the overly stimulating sight. Old Wang and the water plant worker exchanged sly smiles, teasing the younger ones that they shouldn't listen to what just happened in the bathroom. The whole group crowded into the room to check in, Linfan standing there while Yan Nini's face was beet red from being caught in such a sensitive situation. Linfan took the opportunity to check his status panel. His strength index had reached 605, officially confirming him as a monster in human skin. Yan Nini tried to explain, but the more she spoke, the more tangled her words became, while the three men behind her guffawed with knowing looks. Old Wang cleared his throat to defuse the situation, steering the conversation towards the newborn baby who had safely arrived thanks to Linfan carrying the team. Linfan looked at Yang Hui and the baby, asking if she had thought of a name for this little angel yet. The mother, neighbor, and Grandma Shu explained that they respected the mother's right to name her child, and thus hadn't dared to decide for her. Linfan nodded in agreement, stating that a name would follow the child for life, so it needed to be chosen very carefully. Yang Hui smiled weakly, her gentle gaze on her child as she said she would think about it more. Finally, she settled on the affectionate nickname Juju, leaving the official name to be decided later. Gu Hang stood in a corner, watching this scene with a heavy heart, feeling bitter on behalf of the mother and child as he thought of the despicable husband who had fled. The scene shifted to a mental torture session. Linfan praised Feifei and Tingting for their bravery, then promised a special reward. Feifei, with her keen intuition, immediately broke into a cold sweat, sensing an ominous premonition about what was to come. Linfan patted Tingting's head, announcing that Old Wang's sponsored reward was 2 colossal sets of exam papers. Tingting, innocently delighted, thanked him profusely, while Feifei stood beside her, trembling like a leaf. Feifei immediately put on a mask of despair, tears streaming down her face because of this unwanted gift. The little girl sobbed, thanking Linfan for warming all 4 seasons in a tone of utter despair. Linfan and Old Wang watched, full of pride, naively thinking the little girl was crying from overwhelming emotion and happiness. The next morning, Linfan woke up, brushed his teeth, washed his face, and prepared to start a new day of energetic grinding. He stepped out into the yard to greet Old Wang and Old Zhou, who were practicing health exercises on the park's fitness equipment. Linfan carried his sword on his shoulder, bidding farewell to Wang Zhongguo to start his new day of work with a bright smile. He instructed Gu Hang to reinforce the low fence with barbed wire to prevent trespassers from climbing over. Linfan confidently entrusted the specialized task to Gu Hang, then turned and left to attend to his own matters. Gu Hong watched his retreating figure, secretly admiring his philosophy of maintaining order and discipline even in the apocalypse. Linfan walked out of the Iron Gate alone, leaving behind the piles of zombie corpses he had just slaughtered. He dragged a trash bin full of corpses to the collection point, considering cleaning up the battlefield as an obvious task. After finishing with the last pile of garbage, Linfan stretched refreshingly, intending to go home and rest. Suddenly, an off-road vehicle sped towards him at an insane speed, making him startle and become vigilant. Inside the vehicle, Brother Hao's subordinates pointed and cheered, recognizing their old enemy standing conspicuously in front of them. Brother Hao gripped the steering wheel with a resentful expression, determined to ram and kill the one who dared to disrespect him the other day. He floored the accelerator, and the car roared, charging forward like a mad beast. The subordinates in the back laughed gleefully, thinking Linfan had been too merciful by letting their boss live another day. Linfan turned his head to look at the car speeding directly towards him, with cold, sharp eyes. The car smashed into the trash bin, creating a terrifying collision, but Linfan managed to dodge the attack at the last second. Brother Hao stared in astonishment, seeing his target still unharmed. Reassuring himself that it was just luck, he frantically swerved, and the car drifted, tires screeching on the road, to turn back and attack again. Linfan stood watching the monstrous car with a look of exasperation, as if watching a bunch of reckless delinquents. He drew his heavy sword from its sheath, his eyes becoming serious as he realized these guys truly had a death wish. Brother Hao yelled madly, flooring the gas and charging straight at Linfan with the intention of crushing his opponent. Linfan raised his sword high, coldly declaring a death sentence for his enemy right before the speeding car's front. Linfan unleashed a dominant sword strike, splitting the oncoming car in half as if slicing a piece of cake, terrifying the people inside to their core. Boss Hao's face drained of all color, sweat pouring down like rain, as he witnessed the scythe of death pass right before his nose. The driver tried to steer in vain as the car had already been split into two separate pieces, accompanied by the deafening sound of shattering metal. Linfan calmly admired his heavy sword, satisfied to realize that farming zombies just now had significantly leveled up this weapon. Crash! The two halves of the car flew to either side of the road, thick dust rising, signaling a devastating crash landing. Brother Hao scrambled out of the wreckage, clutching his head, both utterly panicked and bitterly cursing loudly. He pointed directly at Linfan and yelled, unable to believe that there was someone in the world who could slice a car in half with a sword, like in an action movie. Linfan maintained an unusually calm demeanor, coldly retorting by asking who truly had mental problems here. The thug furiously cursed, veins bulging in his neck, claiming he could do whatever he wanted without reason, and continued to swear. He looked at the ruined property, still not recovered from the shock, not understanding what kind of monster had just happened to his beloved car. The subordinates scrambled to their feet, gathering around their boss, each of them looking utterly bewildered, not understanding what had just happened. Linfan closed his eyes and sighed in exasperation, secretly judging the poor manners of today's youth who swore and cursed the moment they opened their mouths. He ordered the whole group to obediently follow him to the police station to face punishment if they didn't want to suffer more. The purple-haired girl trembled as she tried to dissuade him, realizing Linfan was no ordinary person, and advised her boss not to foolishly poke this hornet's nest again. Slap! Brother Hao slapped his girlfriend hard across the face, frantically dismissing all warnings in a fit of bloodlust and false pride. He charged in and threw a full-force punch towards Linfan, with the blind belief that he could turn the tables at the last minute. Linfan gently caught his opponent's fist as if playing with a child, his eyes full of pity for such foolishness. His eyes flashed with a deadly red glow. He twisted the thug's arm and asked him where he got the immense audacity to try and kill him. As a result, the whole group was tied up tightly, dejectedly following Linfan to the police station to have their character re-educated. The purple-haired girl's face turned pale upon hearing the words police station, stammering a question in extreme confusion. The driver hastily turned around, begging Linfan for a chance to become a loyal subordinate to save his pathetic life. Linfan coldly refused outright, not even bothering to glance at the group of useless individuals clinging to life. The purple-haired girl realized this guy was too strong to need subordinates, so she immediately changed tactics to use her own assets to find a way to survive. She provocatively pushed out her chest, uttering seductive words, inviting Linfan to enjoy her supreme bedroom skills in the apocalypse. In response to that enthusiastic offer, there was still a brief refusal and Linfan's disdainful gaze. While dragging the trash cart carrying the prisoners, Linfan suddenly stopped, sensing someone's gaze peeking from the adjacent building. Su Xiaoxiao hid behind the window curtain, trembling as she saw the familiar figure of the ominous individual dragging a cart full of people. Linfan turned his head, flashing a smile he thought was friendly, but in others' eyes, it was no different from the Grim Reaper calling their name. The streamer girl was so scared she cowered, hallucinating that she was about to become the next victim in his killing game. Linfan sighed regretfully for the young girl, thinking she hadn't yet overcome the psychological shock of the apocalypse, which was why she was so timid. As night fell, Linfan had dragged the entire group to the gate of Huang City's police station, the place where their punishment would be carried out. He casually introduced this as the place where previous criminals had been brought for thorough character reform. The purple-haired girl looked into the deep, dark shadows inside the police station, her intuition telling her something ominous was about to happen. Linfan waved goodbye with good intentions, hoping that in their next life, these scumbags would learn to be decent people. Desperate cries and pleas echoed, but it was too late. Fear enveloped the girl as she was pushed towards the gate of death. From the darkness of the police station, numerous pairs of blood-red eyes glowed, accompanied by hungry growls. A legion of zombie police swarmed out like a disturbed beehive, pouncing on the group of survivors to begin their bloody night feast. The next morning, Chen He stretched and woke up on the balcony, feeling unusually refreshed after a rare good night's sleep. Gu Hang was extremely anxious and restless because his idol Lin Fan had gone monster farming yesterday and hadn't been seen since. The heavy wooden gate slowly opened, revealing a familiar figure stepping into the base. Lin Fan appeared with a radiant smile as if no massacre had ever occurred, waving good morning to his bewildered comrade. He earnestly asked Gu Hang to drive the water cannon truck to wash away the zombie blood, confessing his ineptitude at driving heavy-duty trucks. Gu Hang suddenly froze, cold sweat beginning to pour as his brain processed the unusual information from the previous statement. The soldier was utterly perplexed. "You said you couldn't drive, so how on earth did you haul this massive truck here?" Lin Fan casually gripped the underside of the truck, veins bulging on his arms, preparing to unleash his fantastical strength. He dragged the multi-ton truck as if it weighed nothing, making Gu Hang's jaw drop, as if he were encountering a flesh-and-blood Superman. Old Wang stood atop the city wall, looking down and nodding in approval at the enthusiastic work ethic of the new generation. The two old men, Wang Zhongguo and Zhou Aijun, joked playfully with each other about playing garbage truck music to party with the zombies, creating an incredibly lively atmosphere. Gu Hang took the wheel and drove the truck to clean up, still worried that being too clean would attract bad people to plunder their territory. Inside the cabin, Gu Hang took the opportunity to interview Lin Fan about his future career aspirations in this chaotic world. A memory resurfaced of old Wang explaining to Gu Hang that Lin Fan was a good person, but his operating system was a bit buggy, treating the apocalypse like everyday life. Even after having his thoughts clarified, Gu Hang still felt utterly bewildered, breaking out in a cold sweat over his comrade's worldview. Lin Fan chattered endlessly about a long list of professions, from security guard, real estate agent, to delivery driver, to earn honest money to buy what he liked. Gu Hang was speechless, trying to explain that in the apocalypse, one could just loot items for free, instead of grinding painstakingly, like in an online game. Lin Fan immediately switched into civics teacher mode, correcting Gu Hang's misguided notions about how getting rich wasn't hard, but one must have ethics. Gu Hang could only nod profusely to move past the topic, because he couldn't use normal human logic to argue with a monster. While chatting idly, Lin Fan's expression suddenly changed, ordering an emergency stop, because his radar had detected a large boss tailing them. A gigantic green-skinned zombie with a hideous cluster of eyes on its shoulder suddenly blocked the truck, roaring to assert its power. Lin Fan coolly kicked open the door and rushed out, a heavy sword in hand, ignoring his teammates' warnings of danger from inside the vehicle. He calmly drew his sword, clicking his tongue as he assessed this monster was just another evolved specimen to farm experience points. The monster's 1,000-pound punch descended, but was effortlessly blocked by Lin Fan's sword. Meanwhile, at the desert base, alarms blared loudly as a disaster-level threat rapidly approached. A colossal red-skinned titan was tearing through the defense line, flipping a heavy tank like a rice paper cracker. Soldiers scattered like falling mulberries before the absolute power of the boss-level monster that had just breached the defensive perimeter. The control room was in chaos, staff desperately screaming for aid as the situation spiraled beyond control. The female commanding officer and the old scientist could only stare at the screen, utterly helpless against such destructive power. Back on the main battlefield, the green zombie began to sweat profusely, realizing it had poked the wrong hornet's nest. Lin Fan leaped into the air, delivering a fatal blow that struck directly down onto the monster's head with terrifying force. The sword's tip pierced through its steel-hard skin. He applied more force to drill through the resisting opponent's skull. A crisp cracking sound echoed, signaling that the monster's skull had officially shattered under the domineering blade. As he pressed the sword down, he comforted the monster, telling it to bear the pain for a moment, and then it would be freed. The monster crashed to the ground with a thud, and the system chimed, adding 3 points to gamer Linfan's account. Gu Hang quickly jumped out of the car, rushing over anxiously to check on the team's big brother, wondering if he was unharmed. Linfan hoisted the sword onto his shoulder, turned back, and coolly declared in a manly tone that he would ensure his teammates' safety. Gu Hang froze for 5 seconds, his face dumbfounded, never expecting to hear such a cheesy romantic line from the monster slayer's mouth. Noticing his teammate's strange attitude, Linfan questioned him, but Gu Hang could only stammer denials to hide his embarrassment. The former soldier felt an unfamiliar sensation. Having always protected others, he now felt an unusual flutter in his heart, being shielded by such a formidable young man. The group stopped their vehicle before the mangled corpse of the muscular zombie, stunned by the bloody mess. Wen Jie snapped at his teammate for being called by a nickname, seizing the opportunity to assert his masculinity on the battlefield. Driver Mao broke out in a cold sweat, wondering in confusion if this was the same monster they had encountered before. Wen Jie scrutinized the corpse like a detective, asserting that this one was taken down by a cold weapon, with no arrow wounds. The two subordinates exchanged uneasy glances, unable to believe anyone could be skilled enough to solo 1v1 and kill this monster in one punch. The big sister in the back seat coldly ordered them to move, not wanting to waste time lingering in this eerie place. The armored vehicle slowly advanced into the Sunshine residential area under the silent, menacing night. Driver Mao noticed something unusual. The streets were completely clear of zombies, as if someone had thoroughly cleaned up. Wen Jie pointed towards the strongly reinforced gate, confidently asserting that there were top-tier survivors inside. The big sister reminded the group to be highly vigilant, recalling the bloody lesson about trust in this apocalyptic world. The scene shifted to room 704, where a knock on the door broke the peaceful atmosphere of the gamer's sanctuary. Linfan, cleaver in hand, leisurely walked to open the door with the demeanor of a strict landlord. As he walked, he mumbled, choosing a name for the guest, deciding on Zhao Yan to avoid clashing with his home harem. The door opened, and Linfan froze for a few seconds, seeing Yan Nini dressed in extremely sharp office attire, exuding a peak aura. He leaned against the door, teasing that she was the second young woman to have the honor of stepping into his lair. Hearing this, Yan Nini's jealousy flared up, wondering which vixen had arrived before her. Linfan calmly declared that the first one was the neighbor, but he had already chopped her into mincemeat. Yan Nini's face turned pale upon hearing this, her eyes wide with shock as she stared at the gleaming cleaver in the model killer's hand. She forced a laugh, praising Linfan's dark sense of humor, while cold sweat streamed down her back. Linfan decided to remain silent to look cool, letting her imagination run wild about his dangerous nature. Linfan was clearing away a pile of cardboard boxes when he turned to inquire, seeing the secretary standing hesitantly with an awkward expression. Yan Nini blushed crimson, sitting demurely on the sofa, timidly asking for a delicate favor because Aunt Flo had unexpectedly visited. He didn't quite catch it, thinking a relative had actually come to visit, so he enthusiastically suggested buying delicious food to entertain them properly. She panicked, waving her hands in denial, sweating as she clarified that she needed to buy sanitary pads, not entertain any guests. Linfan scratched his head and gave a wry smile at the disastrous misunderstanding, while Nini rattled off a long list of brands she needed, any type. He happily accepted the task of going to the supermarket tomorrow, and she took the opportunity to ask him to buy some for all the women in the house to use gradually. The scene shifted to Huang City Water Plant, where Linfan announced that machine maintenance work was complete, and they were preparing to retreat. Wang Kai stood outside, praising Linfan's god-tier repair skills profusely, his eyes full of admiration. The bald guy sighed, lamenting that only here did he feel useful. No one wanted to be a useless parasite in this apocalyptic era. Linfan rode his sports bicycle, carrying Wang Kai smoothly down the road, praising the aunt's brilliant idea of adding a back seat for a comfortable ride. The two passed by the riverside area, where a luxury yacht was anchored in the clear blue water. He keenly spotted signs of life on the yacht, with a total of 5 survivors casually going about their business. The yacht, named Manhwa, had become a luxurious refuge, with several women in bikinis enjoying the sun and breeze as if on vacation. Wang Kai wondered if zombies could swim, seeing those people making noise and exposing themselves in broad daylight. Linfan pondered and analyzed the basic characteristics of zombies: speed, explosive strength, and an insane craving for flesh and blood. He speculated that the people on the boat could hold out for a long time thanks to water and fish, as long as the undead truly couldn't swim. Linfan stopped his bike in front of Xinhua bookstore, instructing Wang Kai to stand guard outside and shout loudly if anything happened, so he could go inside to loot. He flashed an evil grin, carrying a thick stack of test papers he bought for Feifei. Sure, the little girl would scream at this gift of knowledge full of love. Continuing his shopping trip, he stopped in front of a mother and baby store, again making his subordinates stand guard while he went inside to stock up. Linfan remembered Yang Hui's situation, so he decided to conveniently grab some essential baby supplies as a welcome gift. Linfan was leisurely pushing a shopping cart as if taking a stroll when a life-weary zombie suddenly appeared behind him. The monster let out a piercing roar, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, intending to pounce and tear apart the delicious prey before it. A sharp sword strike sent the enemy to its demise, and Linfan even had the leisure to promise he would return the shopping cart to its original spot, like an exemplary citizen. No sooner had he finished than his keen hearing caught the sound of hurried footsteps rushing from above. He looked up at the ceiling, surprised to see that these undead creatures even knew how to launch surprise attacks from the ventilation ducts. A small figure unexpectedly fell freely from a hole in the ceiling onto the hard-tiled floor. Linfan quickly grabbed the boy's collar, saving him from an obvious fall, which made the kid shriek in panic. The boy was scared stiff, his face drained of color, thinking he was about to be devoured by the stranger. He calmly reassured the trembling boy that he was a living human, not a flesh-eating monster. Before he could fully recover, the warehouse door was breached, and a swarm of hungry zombies poured in like a disturbed beehive. The boy scrambled away, while Linfan wearily drew his sword, criticizing the weak mentality of today's younger generation. He swung his sword, decapitating the leading zombie, blood splattering right before the eyes of the boy hiding and observing. The boy stared wide-eyed at the unbelievable scene, sweat pouring down him as if he had taken a bath, utterly shocked by the overwhelming power. Linfan wielded his sword like an artist, turning the entire horde of zombies into a pile of minced meat in the blink of an eye with terrifying speed. The boy couldn't believe his eyes, seeing someone defeat monsters as effortlessly and calmly as if taking a walk in the park. After clearing the battlefield, he turned to ask the boy what his purpose was for appearing in this death trap. He began to lecture him on civic responsibility, warning that in these chaotic times, even adults struggled to survive, let alone children wandering alone. The boy trembled, stammering that he had risked his life venturing in here just to find some food to fill his stomach because he was too hungry. Linfan asked about his companions, and the boy quickly offered a polite thank you, then tried to slip away, still suspicious of his benefactor. He called out, startling the boy, who was still mentally debating whether this powerful man had ill intentions. Linfan found the outside too dangerous, so he decided to escort the boy all the way home to ensure his safety. Under the deceptively clear sky of the apocalypse, the boy revealed his true name was Gu Zicheng. As they walked, he casually chatted about how he had conveniently decapitated a zombie with the same surname as Gu, and thrown its corpse into the trash for cleanliness. Standing before the dilapidated lodging area, Linfan once again used his standard cover story, claiming to be a security guard and real estate agent to conceal his true identity. The door opened, and Gu Zicheng happily announced to his grandpa that he had returned home safely. The boy excitedly showed off his spoils of war, a bag of food he had found at the supermarket so that he and his grandpa wouldn't starve. The old man in the wheelchair squinted, looking at the strange young man with a sword on his back with suspicion and caution. The old man was haunted by memories of neighbors looting food, making him extremely wary of strangers. Linfan smiled reassuringly, explaining that he had merely escorted the child home along the way because he found the outside world too chaotic. Gu Zicheng excitedly boasted to his grandpa that this big brother was incredibly strong, and the zombies outside were just small fry with no chance against him. Understanding the situation, the old man's eyes welled up with tears as he grasped his benefactor's hand to express profound gratitude for saving his grandson. He glanced over the wall covered in commendation certificates and realized that this boy was an outstanding student, truly a model child. When asked about the boy's parents, the old man sadly recounted the tragedy of his father dying young while saving someone, and his mother leaving to marry another. The old man's tears fell as he spoke of his own helplessness, being paralyzed and becoming a burden to his young grandson. Wiping away his tears, the old man recounted the days he barely survived on social welfare and the kindness of others before the pandemic erupted. But when the apocalypse struck, their meager food reserves were completely looted, forcing the boy to risk his life to find food outside. Gu Zicheng quickly held his grandpa's hand to comfort him, acting like a mature man despite his young age. The old man gathered his remaining strength, trying to lift himself from the old wheelchair to make a request. He tightly grasped Linfan's hand, earnestly pleading with him to take his poor grandson along so he would have a chance to survive. The boy frantically pushed Linfan away, resolutely refusing the chance to survive, choosing to stay and care for his grandpa, which made Linfan ponder. Linfan boldly declared that the zombies outside were just weak monsters, nothing to be afraid of or consider a burden. He placed his hand on Gu Zicheng's head, asserting that meeting good people in this wretched world was a rare ray of hope. Linfan wondered if he couldn't even save such an understanding child. Then what meaning did his power truly hold? His gaze softened with empathy, sharing that he deeply understood the pain of loneliness and helplessness. Images of young Linfan appeared in his memory, standing alone in the dark, proving that he too had experienced a painful past. He flashed a radiant, handsome smile, telling Gu Zicheng to pack their belongings so he could take both him and his grandpa away from this place. The old man and the boy burst into happiness, tears welling in their eyes as they profusely thanked their newfound savior. The door suddenly burst open, interrupting the emotional atmosphere, and a shadowy figure abruptly appeared, startling all three of them. The strange man walked in with an arrogant expression, his tone demanding, as he questioned their presence during these chaotic times. Gu Zicheng fearfully hid behind Linfan, pointing at the man and accusing him of being the one who had stolen their food. The old man indignantly exposed the man's identity as Qian Yi, a neighbor with a criminal record who habitually lived off society. He bitterly recounted how Qian Yi had once feigned poverty and hardship to beg for rice, exploiting the kindness of the old man and his grandson to play tricks. That scoundrel not only stole all their food, but also brutally beat Gu Zicheng when the boy tried to stop him. Linfan calmly reassured the old man and the boy, declaring that with him protecting them from now on, they wouldn't have to fear anyone. He turned to look at Qian Yi with eyes as sharp as knives, questioning his despicable behavior of bullying the elderly and children. Qian Yi rolled up his sleeve to show off his full-sleeve tattoo, arrogantly claiming to be a notorious gangster to intimidate his opponent. He aggressively lunged forward, grabbing Linfan's shoulder, intending to use violence to teach the brat before him a lesson he wouldn't forget. Qian Yi gritted his teeth and pushed with all his might, but Linfan stood firm like a stone statue, not budging even a millimeter. Seeing that it was no use, he furiously grabbed a nearby computer monitor, raised it high, and aimed to smash it directly onto his opponent's head. Without a word, Linfan unleashed a thunderous punch that instantly shattered the computer monitor in his enemy's hand, sending fragments flying everywhere. Qian Yi's face drained of all color as he trembled, staring at the rigid metal object that had been punched through, wondering what kind of monster stood before him. Linfan turned to confirm the origin of the rice sack, and Gu Zicheng immediately pointed out the item that had just been stolen from his home. Linfan hoisted the sack of rice onto his shoulder as if it weighed nothing, flashing a radiant smile and signaling for the old man and boy to retreat. Seeing the opponent turn his back and walk away as if nothing had happened, Qian Yi broke out in a cold sweat, stunned by how shamefully he had been ignored. As Linfan walked, he issued a cool warning, advising the thug not to foolishly try to hit a rock with an egg again. Upon arriving at the residential complex gate, Wang Zhongguo and Zhou Aijun warmly greeted them, curious about the new members Linfan had brought back. Witnessing this scene, Wang Zhongguo was moved to tears, silently sighing that Linfan was the last beacon of hope, sheltering the elderly and children in this cruel world. Linfan happily introduced Gu Zicheng and his grandfather to everyone, announcing that the Sunshine apartment complex had officially welcomed 2 new residents. The 3 old men quickly connected, asking about each other's ages and recognizing each other as extremely close brothers. Linfan thoughtfully arranged for Grandpa Gu to stay on the first floor for easy wheelchair access, demonstrating his meticulous leadership and care. The women in the base also rushed out to welcome the safe return of their young leader. He pulled out a discreet bag of items and handed it to Yan Nini, meticulously instructing her on how to use day and night sanitary pads, leaving her dumbfounded. Linfan leaned in and whispered Grandma Shu's folk remedy. The only way to completely cure menstrual cramps was to get pregnant, making Yan Nini blush furiously. The female streamer disastrously misunderstood that Linfan was propositioning her to have a child. She covered her face in shame, shrieked, and ran off, leaving him utterly bewildered. Linfan then handed a bag of newborn supplies to another woman, asking her to deliver it to Yang Hui and her child. Xu Guifen stood nearby, smiling faintly and praising that anyone who could marry such a thoughtful young man would truly have accumulated good karma for 3 lifetimes. Linfan gleefully showed off a special gift for the children, causing Feifei's face to turn ashen, as if she had seen a ghost, upon seeing the cover of a workbook. Tingting innocently accepted her reward, smiling brightly as she thanked Uncle Lin, unaware of the arduous academic future awaiting her. Linfan smiled radiantly, personally handing Feifei a collection of 5th-grade math Olympiad exam papers, explaining that Grandma Liang said the girl was a bit weak in math, leaving the victim frozen. Ting Ting burst into tears of jealousy, scolding the devil uncle for only giving her regular homework while favoring Feifei with such an elite selection. He then led Guzi Cheng to meet Liang Yan, introducing the boy as a well-behaved, excellent student with walls full of awards, so the teacher could tutor him further. Guzi Cheng was so shocked he froze, while Ting Ting wailed in despair, knowing another rival was about to join her painful academic journey. Knock, knock. A knock on the door shattered the quiet atmosphere of the early morning. Linfan, with his messy bed hair, just woke up and asked Liu Hong in surprise why she was looking for him so early in the morning. Liu Hong hesitated, then said that today was Feifei's 10th birthday, and she shamelessly wanted to ask him for a small favor. The serious young man's eyes lit up, and he immediately declared he would buy a few more sets of practice exams as a birthday gift for the girl, startling the woman. Liu Hong broke out in a cold sweat, forced a smile, and quickly clarified that they only needed a cake or baking ingredients, not more academic knowledge. Linfan's face fell in disappointment, but he still tried to salvage the situation by asking if they were absolutely sure they didn't need more exam papers, leaving the other person utterly speechless. At a pastry shop, Su Xiaoxiao lay sprawled on the floor in her splendid princess dress, dejectedly wishing the apocalypse was just a long nightmare. She wearily stood up, intending to pull back the curtains to let in some sunlight, to alleviate her boredom and change the atmosphere. The moment she pulled back the curtains, she shrieked, seeing Linfan's leering, smiling face looming right against the glass door, like something out of a horror movie. Su Xiaoxiao trembled, backing away, clutching a fruit knife for self-defense, stammering to ask what depraved act he intended to commit. Linfan leaned close to the glass, whispering as if dealing in contraband, saying he wanted to order a custom cake for a 10-year-old girl's birthday. The pastry streamer was bewildered, completely unable to comprehend what this strange man was talking about children and cakes in the midst of this chaotic era. He told himself to speak softly lest he scare her, judging that her mental state was severely unstable due to the apocalypse trauma, causing her moods to fluctuate erratically. Su Xiaoxiao broke into a sweat, calculating that if she refused, this pervert might break in to investigate. So she randomly nodded, claiming to have a cake to save her life. Linfan asked about the price, making her scratch her head, unable to understand what he intended to pay with in these times. Finally, she dejectedly told him to give whatever he wanted. Su Xiaoxiao stared blankly at Linfan's retreating back, unable to believe this eccentric man would leave so decisively after such a dramatic cake order. The scene shifted to the Chao River area in Huang City, where nature still shone with brilliant golden sunlight, a stark contrast to the ongoing disaster. Linfan carried his greatsword and a newly acquired fishing set worth 200 yuan, happily muttering about needing to find fresh food for little Feifei's birthday since all the market meat had spoiled. A yacht cruising along the riverbank spotted him. The silver-haired man on deck pointed and shouted loudly, signaling his companions about the survivor's appearance. Linfan stood on the bank, waving back at the strangers in a friendly manner, making them wonder what on earth he was doing in such a dangerous place. He replied with a bright, nonchalant smile that he was fishing, his calm demeanor baffling the people on the yacht. The three men on the yacht stared at each other in shock. The silver-haired leader thought Linfan must be tired of living to dare go fishing in this zombie-infested city. As the yacht glided past, the leader explained that the city had fallen and offered to take Linfan aboard to sail downriver to a deserted island for refuge. The old leader secretly calculated that saving people wasn't out of kindness, but to utilize male labor to increase the group's chances of survival. Linfan politely declined the invitation, feeling perfectly fine, and secretly judged that this group wasn't too bad, as they were still willing to extend a hand to strangers. Just then, a group of zombies, catching the scent of living humans, burst out from the bushes behind Linfan with hungry growls, startling him. The people on the yacht screamed in panic, urging him to jump into the river immediately so they could pull him up, believing an ordinary person couldn't escape the undead. Instead of fleeing for his life, Linfan calmly drew the greatsword from his back, a confident and arrogant smirk playing on his lips. The group on the yacht broke into a cold sweat. They shook their heads in despair and were about to abandon him, thinking the city was about to gain another zombie. A brilliant golden sword stroke tore through the air. Linfan swung his arm, decapitating 3 zombies simultaneously, so fast that black blood splattered like fireworks. The 3 men on the yacht stared wide-eyed and open-mouthed, their faces drained of all color, witnessing a scene of zombie slaughter so dominant it defied their imagination. Linfan sheathed his sword, turned to look at the stunned group, and shrugged, saying everything was fine, then casually asked if they were really going to live on an island. As the yacht drifted further away, the old leader, still reeling from shock, managed to wish him good luck, seeing him stand proudly beside a pile of headless corpses. Watching the yacht disappear, Linfan muttered to himself that if they wanted to survive, they should hide deep in the forest, instead of going to an island, where resources would soon run out. A horde of red-eyed undead shrieked wildly, charging out from the trees as if to devour their prey alive. Linfan stood calmly amidst the dense encirclement, only slightly frowning as he complained that the number of monsters was higher than expected. The old captain on the yacht clung tightly to the railing, shaking his head in dismay, convinced that the young man was overly confident and about to be minced. In the blink of an eye, Linfan had sheathed his greatsword, surrounded by a scattered pile of zombie corpses, not a single one moving. The old man on the yacht stared, eyes wide and mouth agape, unable to believe his eyes at such overwhelming power from a mere mortal. Seeing the opportunity was too good, the old captain decided to turn back and follow Linfan instead of heading to that risky deserted island. In apartment 204, Yang Hui held her newborn child, anxiously asking her neighbor sister if the baby could grow up safely. The neighbor sister grasped her hand tightly, her resolute gaze reassuring her that the child would definitely grow up healthy. She recounted the story Linfan once told about the mother who hanged herself to save her child, using it as motivation for Yang Hui to be more confident. Yang Hui looked down at her tiny sleeping child, telling herself she must become strong to become a pillar of support for this tiny life. Tears welled up in the neighbor sister's eyes as she recalled that in her most desperate moments, her daughter Feifei was the only reason she stayed in this world. She silently thanked heaven and earth for letting her meet Linfan, the man who brought hope and light to this entire gloomy apartment complex. She swore to herself that she would use her life to protect this community, for this was the starting point for their future. A knock-knock sound interrupted the emotional atmosphere of the two women. Linfan entered with a radiant smile, carrying a large bag of fish, saying it was to nourish the new mother and celebrate little Feifei's birthday. The neighbor sister intended to take the fish to cook, but Linfan volunteered to enter the kitchen to show off his hidden talent. But as soon as he picked up the knife, the team's savior froze for 5 seconds, realizing he had never prepared fish before. Seeing his clumsiness, the neighbor sister chuckled, then approached, guiding his hands from behind in an extremely suggestive posture. She blushed and explained that she was just a normal housewife, wanting to teach him how to cook, to feel that she also had some valuable contribution to the group. As Linfan was clumsily slicing fish, the neighbor sister suddenly pressed close from behind, guiding his hands, making him blush furiously because the posture was too suggestive. Teased by her for being too eager to learn, the serious young man could only break out in a cold sweat due to this older sister's boldness. To escape the awkward atmosphere, he hastily made an excuse that he had to go inspect the water plant with Wang Kai, then swiftly fled the kitchen. The neighbor sister watched his desperate retreat and chuckled with amusement, praising him as an interesting young man. Outside, the city was still engulfed in smoke and fire, and the desolate destruction of the apocalypse. On the rooftop, Linfan asked Wang Kai if there was any strategy to prevent the zombies from stacking up to climb into the base. Wang Kai was extremely bewildered upon hearing this, wondering why everyone thought he was a military expert when he was just a lowly network installer. The technician explained that he didn't have any extraordinary qualifications, and not to set such high expectations, as it made him feel like he would faint from the pressure. After discussing, Linfan rode his bicycle, carrying Wang Kai, on their way to the water plant to inspect the equipment. While cycling smoothly, Linfan suddenly turned back, feeling a strange gaze staring at him from behind. It turned out Wang Kai, sitting behind him, was gazing at him intently, which gave him goosebumps, forcing him to ask what this guy was dreaming about. Finally, both of them arrived at the Huang City water plant to begin their important inspection mission. Standing before the control room door, Linfan suddenly remembered he had tightly closed the main door yesterday before leaving. But now it was different. He observed carefully that the door was slightly ajar, certainly not due to the wind, but from external force. Linfan's face hardened, and he broke out in a cold sweat, realizing someone had infiltrated the water plant before them. Despite the danger, he decided he had to go inside and check immediately to ensure the machinery was still intact for the entire base to use. Linfan drew his greatsword, ordered Wang Kai to hide carefully behind him, then cautiously approached the suspicious door. He carefully pushed open the iron door. A creaking sound echoed, tearing through the tense, silent space. As soon as the door was ajar, a whole horde of red-eyed zombies inside simultaneously turned their heads, roaring a welcome to the two uninvited guests. Linfan, holding his greatsword, his face full of doubt, wondered who played dirty by herding zombies in here, even though he had cleared the area before. He skillfully sheathed his sword and sighed in relief after dealing with the monsters blocking the way at the water plant. Wang Kai rushed over to report that all the equipment was still working perfectly, without a single scratch. Linfan pondered deeply. If the enemy didn't destroy the machinery, their only target must be his group's lives or to sabotage the water supply. While deducing, he suddenly flinched, urging Wang Kai to pack up quickly and rush back to the base, because he remembered something extremely important. At the Sunshine apartment complex, the brilliant sunset enveloped the rare tranquility amidst the harsh apocalypse. Ting shouted for Guzicheng to wait for her, as both raced home like true track and field athletes. Teacher Liang stood at the door, watching the children compete in their studies and then in running, and could only smile gently and benevolently. Feifei waved goodbye to Teacher Liang on the stairs, with a radiant smile, promising to see her later. The silver-haired girl paused for a moment, feeling strange and wondering about the kind neighbor's meaningful, "See you later." Dismissing her wandering thoughts, Feifei knocked on apartment 804's door to call her mother, to open it as she did every day after school. As she took off her shoes, she complained about her difficult studies, completely oblivious to the unusually quiet atmosphere inside the house. To her surprise, Linfan's entire harem and comrades all appeared simultaneously, shouting congratulations, leaving the little girl completely stunned. Feifei's mother smiled and explained that today was her 10th birthday, and Uncle Lin had specially bought a cake to celebrate. Feifei was deeply moved, her eyes wide open, her face flushed at the sight of the luxurious cake Linfan had managed to acquire. She burst into tears because she never expected that amidst this chaotic, zombie-filled era, she would still have such a fancy birthday celebration. Linfan stood next to Feifei's mother, clapping and singing the birthday song loudly with the extremely gentle expression of an older brother. The entire room was filled with singing and happiness. Everyone temporarily forgot about the disgusting zombies outside to enjoy this moment. Feifei's mother worried that the loud singing would attract zombies, but Linfan immediately reassured her with a cool assertion of dominance. "With me here, just let loose." Outside the apartment complex, the undead were roaring loudly, as if sending deadly birthday wishes to the party inside. The monsters jostled and pushed each other at the iron gate, creating a chilling and desperate symphony as night fell. Linfan picked up his greatsword, casually announced he was going downstairs to take care of some trivial matters, as if he were taking out the trash, not going to slay monsters. Wang Kai chuckled, and made a blunt remark that the boss was going downstairs to slaughter zombies to liven up the birthday atmosphere even more. Yan Nini immediately elbowed her tactless teammate in the side, reminding him not to talk about bloody violence and scare the children to death. At the same time, the rugged pickup truck of the group of strangers was still silently advancing towards the dangerous apartment complex. Driver Mao strained his eyes on the road, while the woman in the passenger seat was highly vigilant of the suspicious, closed gate ahead. In the back seat, Wen Jie broke out in a cold sweat, recalling the terrifying scene when the mysterious kid attacked him, almost wiping him out earlier. He suddenly froze, his eyes wide open, sweat pouring down as if he had just seen a living ghost in broad daylight. Wen Jie pointed a trembling finger forward, yelling out to his companions that he had just recognized the overpowering madman he once met at the library. He recalled Linfan's arrogant declaration about taking on 100 zombies, while in reality, Linfan had just cleared the battlefield below in an instant. The subordinate in camouflage gaped in astonishment, swearing that anyone who could survive until now and still be so carefree must be a monster, not a human. The female leader smirked, sharply analyzing that anyone who dared to swagger openly on the streets in these times couldn't possibly be normal. She ordered the group to absolutely not approach or get involved with Linfan, as her intuition told her he was an extremely dangerous and unpredictable existence. The sun gradually set behind the tall buildings, closing a bloody day, yet one full of mixed emotions for the survivors. Back at the door of apartment 804, Linfan had finished handling everything and was ready to return to the cozy party atmosphere. He stepped in with the radiant smile of an exemplary uncle, holding a huge, carefully wrapped gift box in his hands for little Feifei. The little girl's eyes shone like stars, her cheeks flushed red, unable to hide her excitement upon receiving the unexpected gift from her idol. But the next second, Feifei's face turned pale, sweat pouring down like rain as she imagined the box containing exercise books. She quickly pushed the gift onto someone else in extreme panic. Feifei tremblingly opened the gift box under Uncle Lin. Fan's affectionate yet pressured gaze, sweat streaming down her face, fearing she'd fall into a homework trap. The little girl was stunned, her eyes wide open in astonishment as she saw what lay inside the fated box. It turned out not to be bombs or textbooks, but a cute toy robot dog, making the little girl sigh in relief as if she had just escaped death's door. Feifei hugged the dog tightly, tears welling up in her eyes from happiness, profusely thanking everyone that the gift wasn't a damned exam. Linfan smiled and patted her head, then delivered another fatal blow, saying the dog had a function to read lullabies for studying, leaving Feifei stunned, realizing this was truly a devil. Seeing the little girl sob in despair, Linfan mistakenly thought his niece was overly moved by her eagerness to learn, so he encouraged her even more. Full of pride, Feifei's mother watched this touching scene, wondering why her child was so eager to learn, yet her grades consistently remained below average. Tingting gleefully ran over, asking to read poems together, making Feifei cry bitterly as she realized she was surrounded by innocent little devils. At a repair shop, the group of strangers was resting and discussing the cruel law of survival in the new world, where the weak would be mercilessly eliminated. Driver Mao ate canned food while reminiscing about his carefree past as a mechanic, never having imagined human hearts could become so dark and corrupted. He broke out in a cold sweat, realizing that if he had kept his naive mindset from the past, he would surely have been wiped out long ago instead of sitting here eating. Despite being the oldest, Mao completely submitted to the female leader, admitting she was the one truly capable of carrying the team in this chaotic world. Looking at the two subordinates eating, Mao felt lucky that this four-person team had cooperated well and supported each other, surviving countless life-or-death calamities. The woman holding a water bottle began analyzing the strategic map, circling death zones like the Xinfeng Hotel that they absolutely must not approach. The whole group listened attentively as she emphasized that old Jin's sanitation truck was their only lifeline, helping them maintain their survival. Referring to the Shanshui Garden area, she firmly asserted that young man was a subordinate of Mad Wolf Wang Dafu and had invited them back only to steal their vehicle. The subordinates nodded in agreement, believing Mad Wolf was a cruel person, and with their big sister's beauty, falling into his hands would be like a lamb offering itself to a tiger's mouth. The woman cleared her throat, then switched to warning about the Hengji apartment, where the survivors had been pushed to their limits, driven mad. She shivered, recalling the horrifying scene there, where corpses lay scattered at the foot of the building, as people preferred to jump to their deaths rather than be torn apart by zombies. The female leader frowned, doubting the character of the group of survivors inside, believing they had become corrupted. A pickup truck loaded with scrap suddenly appeared, tearing through the silent night with its engine noise. The clattering sound of breaking glass rang out piercingly, signaling an impending omen. She flinched nervously, thinking Mad Dog Wang Dafu's subordinates had come to check on them. Wenji was in extreme panic, sweat pouring down like rain, afraid those people would try to eliminate him. A red-haired young man stood on the truck bed, holding a megaphone, and loudly yelling out a scrap collection jingle, echoing throughout the neighborhood. The man in camouflage turned pale, realizing this noise was nothing less than an invitation for death to a party. The loudspeaker, combined with the vehicle's engine, immediately activated the hunting instincts of the surrounding undead. The giant zombie leading its subordinates charged forward with the momentum of a flash flood, ready to crush everything. The female leader broke out in a cold sweat, recognizing the supersized familiar monster they had encountered before. The whole group cursed silently at the enemy's maliciousness for using this cruel borrowed knife tactic to push them into a corner. Not daring to hesitate, she ordered her companions to quickly get into the vehicle to immediately find a way to escape with their lives. The next morning, Linfan stretched as he greeted the dawn, with the refreshed mindset of one at the top of the food chain. Grandma Shu stood in the yard, waving, asking him to find some vegetable seeds to increase production for the base. Bicycle wheels rolled smoothly on the road, emitting a pleasant creaking sound amidst the peaceful morning. Linfan looked at the abandoned electric motorcycles and felt a pang of regret that there was no electricity to charge them, so he resigned himself to the fate of cycling for survival. He told himself cycling was less noisy, avoiding unnecessary trouble when escorting Wang Kai on a mission. While cruising along the road, he turned his head when his eyes accidentally caught a strange signal from the adjacent building. A dirty-faced kid held up a help sign, urgently reporting about a group of female students trapped there.